Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. My Airbnb host keeps texting me from inside the house. The notification sound pierced through the silence of the unfamiliar bedroom, jolting me awake at 3:17 a.m. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen that cast eerie shadows across the rustic cabin walls. Derek, host. Hope you're settling in well. Let me know if you need anything. I'm always nearby. I stared at the message, my sleep-addled brain trying to process why my Airbnb host would be texting me in the middle of the night. The timestamp showed it had been sent just moments ago. I typed back quickly, hoping to discourage any further late-night communications. Me. Thanks, Derek. Everything's great. Just trying to get some sleep. We'll let you know if I need anything tomorrow. I set the phone aside and pulled the heavy quilt up to my chin. The cabin was exactly what I'd needed. Isolated, peaceful, and completely disconnected from the chaos of my recent divorce. 3 days in the mountains of North Carolina. No work, emails, no lawyers calling, just me and the therapeutic silence of nature. The listing had been perfect. Cozy mountain retreat, complete privacy guaranteed. Derek's profile showed a friendly, middle-aged man with kind eyes and a warm smile. His reviews were stellar. Guests consistently praised his attentiveness and the cabin's remote location. Host goes above and beyond, one review had said. You'll feel like you have a guardian angel watching over you. I was drifting back to sleep when another notification chimed. Derek, host. Sorry for the late message. I saw your light was still on and wanted to make sure everything was okay. The mountain can be unsettling for city folk. My blood chilled. I glanced around the dark room. Every light was off. The only illumination came from my phone screen. How could he have seen a light that wasn't there? Me. All lights are off here. Must be mistaken. Good night. I waited, watching the screen. The message showed as read almost immediately, but no response came. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he could see the glow from my phone through the curtains. Or perhaps there was some other explanation. Mountain property owners probably had security cameras, right? Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by strange dreams of being watched through windows and the persistent feeling that I wasn't alone. Morning brought relief in the rational light of day. I made coffee in the well-equipped kitchen and stepped onto the wraparound porch, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The cabin sat on a wooded hillside with no other structures visible in any direction. Pine trees stretched endlessly toward distant peaks, and the only sounds were birdsong and wind through the branches. My phone buzzed with a new message. Derek, host. Good morning. Hope you slept well after our little chat. I've left some fresh eggs from my chickens in the fridge. Thought you might enjoy a proper mountain breakfast. I frowned and checked the refrigerator. Sure enough, there was a carton of farm fresh eggs that hadn't been there yesterday. The shells were still slightly warm. Me. Thank you for the eggs. When did you drop them off? I didn't hear you come by. Derek, host. I'm very quiet. Didn't want to disturb you. I have keys, of course, for maintenance purposes. Hope that's okay. A chill ran down my spine. He'd been inside the cabin while I was sleeping. The thought of someone moving around the house, accessing the kitchen just steps from where I'd been unconscious and vulnerable, made my skin crawl. But hosts did have keys for maintenance. That was standard, right? I spent the morning hiking the trails Derek had recommended, trying to shake off my unease. The wilderness was stunning, and the physical exertion helped clear my head. Maybe I was being paranoid. Divorce proceedings could mess with your mind, make you suspicious of everyone. But when I returned to the cabin that afternoon, things felt different. Subtle changes that might have been my imagination. The coffee mug I'd left on the counter was now in the sink, washed and dried. The throw pillow on the couch was arranged differently. The bathroom door, which I always closed, stood slightly ajar. Me. Derek, were you by the cabin today while I was hiking? The response came immediately. Derek, host. Just did a quick maintenance check while you were out exploring. Everything looks perfect. You're taking good care of the place. Me. I'd prefer if you let me know before entering while I'm staying here. For privacy. Derek, host. Of course. Sorry about that. Old habits. I'm used to the place being empty. I'll make sure to give you a heads up next time. Derek, host. By the way, I noticed you forgot to lock the back door when you left. These mountains can be dangerous. Lots of wildlife. Black bears especially. Always lock up when you leave. I distinctly remembered checking all the doors and windows before leaving. I was compulsive about security, a habit developed during the contentious divorce. But doubt crept in. Maybe I had forgotten in my haste to hit the trails. That evening, I made dinner using Derek's eggs and some groceries I'd brought. As darkness fell, the cabin felt increasingly isolated. Every creak of the old wood made me jump. I tried watching Netflix on my laptop, but the internet was spotty, the connection cutting in and out. Around 10 p.m., my phone lit up. Derek, host. How's your evening going? I see you're having trouble with the Wi-Fi. I can reset the router if you need. Like, I have remote access to the system. I hadn't mentioned the internet issues to anyone. Was he monitoring my usage somehow? Me. How did you know about the Wi-Fi problem? Derek, host. I get alerts when there are connectivity issues. Part of the property management system. Technology these days, I can fix it remotely if you want. Me. That's okay. I'm planning to read and go to bed early anyway. Derek, host. Perfect. There's a great book on the nightstand, Local Legends of Appalachia. Really fascinating stuff about the history of this area. I think you'd enjoy it. I walked to the bedroom and found the book exactly where he'd said it would be. I was certain it hadn't been there before. The cover showed a dark forest with glowing eyes peering from between the trees. I flipped through the pages, stories of mysterious disappearances, ancient curses, and things that lurked in the mountain shadows. Me. Thanks for the book recommendation. Derek, host. You found it. Great. That story about the Watcher is particularly good. Page 127. Sweet Dreams. Page 127 told the tale of a hermit who lived in the mountains, obsessively watching travelers who passed through his territory. He would learn their habits, study their routines, and eventually... The story cut off mid-sentence, the next page is torn out. I slammed the book shut and tossed it aside. This was getting too weird. I needed to establish some boundaries. Me. Derek, I appreciate your hospitality, but I'd like some privacy during my stay. No more maintenance visits unless there's an emergency, and please don't monitor my activities. I just want to relax and be left alone. The message sat unread for several minutes before the response came. Derek, host. I understand completely. I can get a bit overprotective of my guests. Occupational hazard. You won't even know I'm around. Enjoy your solitude. I felt some relief and decided to take a hot shower before bed. The bathroom was spacious with a large clawfoot tub and a separate shower stall. As I waited for the water to heat up, I noticed something odd. The small window above the tub was slightly fogged, as if someone had been breathing on it recently. But the cabin's heating system had been off all day. In the shower, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the porch. I turned off the water and listened, but heard only silence. Mountain cabins made all sorts of noises, I told myself. Settling wood, thermal expansion, small animals. But as I toweled off, I heard it again. A definite creak of the porch boards, followed by the soft sound of the front door opening and closing. My heart hammered as I quickly dressed and crept to the living room. Everything looked normal, but the air felt different, like someone had just passed through. I checked the front door. It was locked, deadbolt engaged, but the metal was warm to the touch as if it had been recently handled. I grabbed my phone and started to call 911, then hesitated. What would I tell them? That my Airbnb host might have a key and might have entered his own property? That I heard sounds that could have been anything? They'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. Instead, I texted Derek me. Did you just come by the cabin? I heard someone on the porch. Derek, host. No, I'm at home for the evening. Probably just wildlife. Raccoons love those porches. Nothing to worry about. Me. Where do you live exactly? Derek, host. Not far. I like to stay close to my properties. Good hosts are always nearby when needed. Me. How close? The message showed as read, but no response came. I spent the next hour checking and double-checking every lock, every window. I pushed furniture in front of the doors and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. The isolation was getting to me, making me paranoid. I'd been through a traumatic divorce. I was vulnerable, imagining threats where none existed. But sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made me bolt upright. The house settling, wind in the trees, the distant hoot of an owl. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion finally began to take hold. That's when the texting started in earnest. Derek, host. Still awake? I can see your bedroom light from here. I sat up looking around the dark room. No lights were on anywhere in the cabin. Derek, host. You should try to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Me. What do you mean, big day? And how can you see any light? Where are you? Derek, host. I'm closer than you think. Derek, host. You look tired. Have you been sleeping? Poorly. The messages were coming rapidly now, one after another. Derek, host. I love watching you move around the cabin. You're so careful, so cautious. Very smart. Derek, host. That blue pajama set is lovely on you. Very flattering color. Terror flooded through me. I was wearing blue pajamas, and he couldn't know that unless he could see me. I ran to the windows, peering out into the darkness, seeing nothing but black shapes of trees. Me. Where are you? Derek, host. I told you, I'm always nearby. Good hosts are attentive to their guests' needs. Derek, host. You seem upset. I don't want you to be scared. I would never hurt you. Derek, host. I just like to watch, to make sure you're safe. These mountains are dangerous. Me. I'm calling the police. Derek, host. Please don't do that, you'll spoil everything. We're having such a nice time together. Derek, host. Besides, what would you tell them? That your host is texting you? That's not illegal, Derek, a host. And you're so far from town. It would take them at least an hour to get here. Derek, host. A lot can happen in an hour. I was shaking now, fumbling with my phone to dial 911. But the signal bars flickered and died. No service. I ran to the landline phone I'd seen in the kitchen, but the line was dead. Derek, host. I had to cut the phone line earlier. For your own good. Sometimes city folk panic over nothing and make bad decisions. Derek, host. The cell tower repeater is on my property. I can control the signal. Derek, host. We're going to have such a wonderful time together, just the two of us. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the front door, but stopped dead when I saw another message. Derek, host. I wouldn't try the car if I were you. Brake lines are tricky things. Mountain roads are so steep and winding. Derek, host. Much safer to stay inside where I can keep an eye on you. I was trapped. No phone, no car, no neighbors for miles. And somewhere in the darkness outside, Derek was watching me. What do you want from me? Derek, host. I want to take care of you. You seem so sad, so broken. Your profile mentioned a recent divorce. You need someone to look after you. Derek, host. I've been watching you since you arrived. You're perfect. Exactly what I've been looking for. Derek, host. The other guests were disappointments. Too loud, too demanding, too resistant. The word other guests made my blood freeze. I thought of the glowing reviews, all those people praising Derek's attentiveness. Where were they now? Me. What happened to the other guests? Derek, host. They found peace. Just like you will. Derek, host. Some fought it at first, but they all came to understand eventually. I provide for them, protect them, love them. Derek, host. They're still here in a way. Part of the mountain now, part of me. I backed away from the windows, retreating to the bathroom, the only room without exterior windows. I locked the door and huddled in the corner, trying to think. There had to be a way out. There was always a way out. Derek, host. Where did you go? I can't see you anymore. Derek, host. That's not fair. Come back to where I can watch you. Derek, host. I don't like it when you hide from me. Derek, host. Come out now. The texts were coming faster, more agitated. Derek, host. I'm coming inside. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I heard the front door open, the deadbolt turning with a metallic click. Footsteps crossed the hardwood floor of the living room, slow and deliberate. Sarah? Derek's voice was different from what I'd expected. Softer, almost gentle. Sarah, where are you? I know you're scared, but there's no need to be. I'm here to help you. The footsteps moved through the cabin, checking rooms. I pressed myself against the bathroom wall, hardly daring to breathe. The divorce was hard on you, wasn't it? Derek's voice was closer now, just outside the bathroom door. I read all about it in your messages. You left your laptop open yesterday. He really hurt you, didn't he? Took everything, made you feel worthless. The door handle rattled. I'll never hurt you like that, Sarah. I'll cherish you, protect you. You'll never have to worry about anything ever again. But you have to trust me. You have to let me in. My phone lit up with another message. Derek, host. Open the door, Sarah. I can wait all night, but you can't stay in there forever. I looked around desperately. The bathroom window was too small to climb through, and it was a 20-foot drop to the rocky ground below anyway. But maybe. I quietly opened the window and used the toilet brush to knock over the metal trash can outside, creating a loud crash. Derek's footsteps immediately headed toward the back of the cabin, trying to escape through the window. Clever girl, but that's a dangerous fall. Stay where you are. I'm coming around. The moment I heard the back door open, I unlocked the bathroom door and sprinted for the front of the cabin. I could hear Derek crashing through the underbrush outside, calling my name. I made it to the front door and yanked it open, then stopped. My car sat in the driveway, but Derek's warning about the brake lines echoed in my mind. 20 miles of winding mountain roads. If he'd sabotaged the brakes, I'd never make it. But there, barely visible in the moonlight, I saw another option. Derek's truck was parked behind a cluster of trees maybe 50 yards away. If I could reach it, I ran across the clearing, branches whipping at my face, rocks cutting my bare feet. Behind me, I heard Derek realize his mistake. "Sarah, come back. You don't understand. You need me." The truck was unlocked, keys in the ignition. I gunned the engine and tore down the mountain road, not daring to look back. My phone suddenly burst to life with signal bars as I got away from Derek's property. I called 911, sobbed out my story to the dispatcher, and kept driving until I reached the sheriff's station in town. The deputies who went to investigate found the cabin empty. Derek was gone, and so was any evidence of his presence. But in the basement, behind a false wall, they found a room filled with personal belongings, clothing, jewelry, identification cards from dozens of people, all former Airbnb guests, all missing persons. Derek himself was never found. The property was seized, the Airbnb listing removed. But sometimes, late at night, I still get text messages from unknown numbers. Unknown. "I'm still watching, Sarah. I'll always be watching." Unknown. "You can't hide forever." Unknown. "I know where you are." I've changed my number 4 times. I've moved twice, but the messages keep coming, and I know that somewhere in those dark mountains, Derek is still out there, still hosting guests who check in but never check out. And sometimes when I'm alone in my new apartment, I swear I can feel eyes watching me through the windows. I'll get a notification on my phone, and for just a moment I'm back in that cabin, trapped and terrified. The listing may be gone, but Derek's hospitality never ends. He's still out there, always nearby, taking care of his guests forever. Unknown. Sweet dreams, Sarah. I'll see you soon. The mountain property remains abandoned, but locals report strange lights in the windows at night, and the sound of phones buzzing endlessly in the empty rooms. The sheriff's department still receives occasional reports of missing hikers in the area, but no bodies are ever found. Just 5-star reviews that appear and disappear on travel websites, all saying the same thing. Host goes above and beyond. You'll feel like you have a guardian angel watching over you, forever and always. I thought my dog was barking at nothing. I was wrong. Max had always been a quiet dog. In the 3 years since I'd rescued him from the shelter, he'd barely barked at anything. Not at the mailman. Not at other dogs. Not even at the raccoons that occasionally raided our garbage cans. That's why, when he started his nightly vigil by the living room window, hackles raised and letting out low, continuous growls that escalated into frantic barking, I knew something was wrong. It started on a Tuesday in late October. I'd just moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street, drawn by its charm and the price that seemed too good to be true. The realtor had been eager to close, almost pushy about it, but I attributed that to the slow market. The house had been empty for 2 years, she'd mentioned briefly. Something about the previous owners moving suddenly for work. The first few nights were peaceful. Max explored every corner of our new home, tail wagging as he claimed his favorite spots. The sunny patch by the kitchen window for afternoon naps, the corner of my bedroom where he could keep watch over me while I slept. Everything was normal, until that Tuesday night. I was unpacking books in the study when Max suddenly appeared in the doorway, ears perked and alert. He padded over to the living room window that faced the street and pressed his nose against the glass. Then came the growling, a deep, rumbling sound I'd never heard from him before. "What is it, boy?" I asked, joining him at the window. The street was empty, illuminated by a single street light that cast long shadows between the old oak trees. Nothing moved except the occasional flutter of leaves in the autumn wind. Max's growling intensified, and he began to whine, a high-pitched sound of distress that made my skin crawl. I checked the porch, the yard, even opened the front door to look around. Nothing. Just the usual suburban quiet of 11 p.m. on a weeknight. Come on, Max. There's nothing there. I gently pulled him away from the window, but he resisted, planting his feet and continuing to stare outside. Eventually, I managed to coax him to bed with treats, but he spent the night restless, jumping up periodically to check the window. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same window, same desperate barking. This time I was ready with my phone's flashlight scanning every inch of the front yard and street. I even walked outside, much to Max's frantic protests from inside the house. He scratched at the door and howled like I was walking into mortal danger. But there was nothing. No prowlers, no animals, no explanation for his behavior. By the end of the week, it had become a routine. Every night between 11 p.m. and midnight, Max would take his post at the window and bark at something only he could see. The neighbors started to complain. Mrs. Henderson from next door came by with a passive-aggressive smile and a suggestion that maybe Max needed professional help to adjust to the new environment. I tried everything. I closed the curtains, but Max would paw at them until he could peek through. I moved his bed to the back of the house, but he'd sneak back to the living room window. I even took him to the vet, thinking maybe his vision or hearing was off, but Dr. Martinez found nothing wrong. Some dogs are just more sensitive to environmental changes, she explained. New house, new smells, new sounds. He'll adjust. But Max didn't adjust. If anything, his nightly episodes became more intense. The barking grew louder, more desperate. He started losing weight from the stress, his usual enthusiasm for walks and playtime diminishing as he became obsessed with whatever he saw outside that window. 2 weeks into this routine, I decided to stay up and really observe what was happening. I set up a chair across from Max's post and waited. At 11:17 p.m., like clockwork, Max assumed his position. His whole body went rigid, ears forward, tail tucked low. The growling started immediately. I followed his gaze, trying to see what he saw. The street looked the same as always, empty, quiet, ordinary. But Max was tracking something, his head moving slowly from left to right as if following movement. His eyes were fixed on a specific spot near the old elm tree across the street. That's when I noticed something odd. The shadow beneath the elm was darker than it should be, even accounting for the thick canopy of leaves. It seemed almost solid, like a black pool that absorbed light instead of simply blocking it. As I stared, the shadow appeared to shift slightly, though there was no wind to move the branches above. Max's barking reached a fever pitch, and he began scratching at the window with such force I worried he'd break the glass. I grabbed his collar to pull him back, and that's when I felt it. His entire body was trembling, not with excitement or aggression, but with pure, primal fear. Dogs don't fear shadows. They don't spend weeks terrorizing themselves over tricks of light. Max was seeing something real, something that threatened us enough to keep him on high alert night after night. I decided to investigate properly. The next day, I visited the local library and looked up the history of our house and the neighborhood. What I found made my blood run cold. The house had a history. In 1987, the Hendricks family had lived there, parents and 2 young children. One October night, 7-year-old Emma Hendricks had disappeared from her bedroom. The window was found open, screen cut from the outside. She was never found, despite extensive searches. The family moved away within a month, unable to bear living in the house where their daughter had vanished. The next family, the Carters, lasted only 6 months. Their dog, a German shepherd named Bruno, had started exhibiting strange behavior. Barking at nothing, refusing to go outside after dark, cowering in corners. When their toddler son began talking about the shadow man who visited his room at night, they packed up and left. 3 more families over the years. all with similar stories. Dogs going crazy, children having nightmares about dark figures, a persistent feeling of being watched. The house would sit empty for months at a time before another unsuspecting family would move in, drawn by the low rent and charming architecture. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Petrosky, noticed what I was researching. "You bought the Hendricks place, didn't you?" she said quietly. I wondered when someone would try again. "You know about the house?" She nodded gravely. "I've lived in this town for 70 years. I remember when Emma went missing. Terrible thing. But that wasn't the first time something like that happened around here." She led me to an older section of records, files dating back to the 1940s and 50s. What I found there made me want to pack up and leave immediately. There had been other disappearances over the decades, all from houses on our street or the surrounding blocks. Children mostly, but sometimes adults, always at night. Always with no trace left behind except open windows and the lingering sense that something had been watching the house for days or weeks beforehand. The pattern was always the same. Families would move in. Everything would be normal for a while. Then pets would start acting strangely. Dogs barking at empty spaces, cats hiding and refusing to come out. Children would complain about bad dreams or shadowy figures. And then eventually someone would vanish. "What is it?" I asked Mrs. Petrosky. "What's taking these people?" She glanced around nervously, as if afraid of being overheard in the empty library. "Old-timers used to call it the collector," she whispered. Said it was something that fed on people, children especially, but it wasn't picky. It would watch a house for weeks, learning the routines, waiting for the right moment. But that's just folklore, right? Urban legends. Mrs. Petrosky's expression was deadly serious. "Tell that to Emma Hendricks. Tell that to the Morrison boy who vanished in 62, or the Rodriguez family in 78. Took both parents and left the baby crying in his crib." I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications. Was Max protecting me from something that had been watching our house, waiting for its chance? The thought made me sick with fear, but it also explained so much. Why the house had been so cheap, why the realtor had been so eager to close, why Max's behavior had changed so dramatically. That night, I didn't even pretend to try sleeping. I sat in the living room with Max, both of us watching that window. I'd set up cameras, one pointed at the street, another at the front yard, a third in the hallway upstairs where Emma Hendricks had disappeared all those years ago. At 11:15 p.m., Max assumed his position. The growling started immediately, deeper and more threatening than ever before. I watched the street through the camera feeds on my laptop, comparing them to what I could see with my naked eye. That's when I saw the discrepancy. On the camera feed, the street looked normal. Empty sidewalks, the elm tree casting ordinary shadows under the streetlight. But looking directly outside, I could see what Max saw. The shadow under the elm was wrong. Too dark, too dense. And it was moving. The shape flowed like liquid darkness, detaching itself from the tree and beginning to cross the street toward our house. It moved with purpose, with intelligence, and as it got closer, I could make out a vaguely humanoid form. Tall, impossibly thin, with what might have been arms that stretched too long and fingers that looked more like claws. Max's barking became frantic, and he threw himself against the window with such force that cracks appeared in the glass. The shadow thing paused at the edge of our property, and although it had no visible face, I felt with absolute certainty that it was looking directly at me. We stared at each other across the yard, me, terrified and transfixed, and this creature of living darkness that had been stalking families on our street for decades. In that moment, I understood that Max hadn't been barking at nothing. He'd been trying to warn me, trying to protect me from something that wanted to add me to its collection of victims. The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. Then the shadow began moving again, flowing around the perimeter of our property like a predator testing defenses. It approached the house from different angles, always staying in darkness, always just at the edge of visibility. I called 911, but how do you explain a shadow that only some people can see? The dispatcher was polite but clearly thought I was having some kind of breakdown. "Sir, we can send an officer to check for prowlers, but please," I begged, "just send someone. My dog's going crazy, and there's something in my yard." 20 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez arrived. I watched through the window as he walked around the property with his flashlight, checking bushes and corners. The shadow had vanished the moment his car pulled up, but Max continued to bark and pace, sensing its nearby presence. "I don't see anything out here, sir," Officer Rodriguez reported when I met him on the porch. "No signs of disturbance, no footprints. Your dog seems pretty worked up, though." "It's been going on for weeks," I explained. "Every night, same time. He sees something that terrifies him." Rodriguez was sympathetic but practical. "Could be coyotes. We've had reports of them coming down from the hills getting into garbage. Dogs can sense them from pretty far away." After he left, I researched everything I could find about shadow people, urban legends, supernatural predators. Most of it was nonsense, but scattered through the folklore were consistent details that matched what I'd witnessed. Entities that existed partially outside normal perception, visible only to some people and animals. Creatures that fed on human life force, collecting victims over decades or centuries. The really disturbing part was the hunting behavior. According to several accounts, these things would watch a house for weeks or months, studying routines and defenses before making their move. They were patient, intelligent, and nearly impossible to stop once they'd chosen a target. I was living in a house that had been marked by one of these creatures for decades. Every family that moved in became potential prey, watched and stalked until the thing decided to feed. The next few nights were a nightmare. Max barely slept, maintaining constant vigilance at the window. I tried keeping him away, but he would howl and scratch at doors until I let him return to his post. The shadow appeared every night now, sometimes across the street, sometimes in our yard, once pressed right against the living room window. That last encounter nearly broke my nerve entirely. I was dozing in my chair when Max's barking jolted me awake. The shadow was right there, just inches away on the other side of the glass. Up close, I could see it wasn't completely formless. There were suggestions of features, hollow spaces where eyes might be, a void where a mouth should have been. Max was throwing himself against the window with such violence that blood appeared on his nose and paws. The thing on the other side seemed to be testing the glass, pressing against it with appendages that left no mark but made the window flex and creak. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I owned, though I had no idea if a physical blade could hurt something made of living shadow. When I returned to the living room, the creature was gone, but Max continued barking for another hour. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I called Mrs. Petrosky and begged her to tell me everything she knew about the collector. "There might be a way to make it leave you alone," she said reluctantly. "But you're not going to like it. Tell me. The old stories say it only takes one person from each house. If you gave it what it wanted, you're suggesting I sacrifice myself to save future families?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she said quickly. "I'm just telling you what the folklore says. Sometimes people would volunteer to save their children or spouses. They'd go outside during one of its visits, and in the morning they'd be gone. But the thing would leave the house alone after that, at least for many years. The idea was horrifying, but I understood the logic. If I disappeared, the creature might consider the property harvested and move on. future families could live there safely. But I wasn't ready to die. There had to be another way. I spent the day researching protection methods, salt lines, iron objects, religious symbols, anything that might create a barrier. Most of it seemed like superstition, but I was desperate enough to try anything. That night I armed myself with every deterrent I could think of. I lined the windowsills with salt, hung iron horseshoes over the doors, and scattered religious medallions around the house. Max watched my preparations with intense interest, as if he understood I was finally taking the threat seriously. At 11 p.m. we took our positions, Max at the window, me beside him with a baseball bat, a flashlight, and a cell phone ready to record evidence. The shadow appeared right on schedule, but this time it seemed more agitated, moving in quick, jerky motions around the property perimeter. It tested each window and door, probing for weaknesses. When it reached the salt lines, it recoiled as if burned, emitting a sound like wind through dead leaves. The iron horseshoes seemed to create barriers it couldn't cross, forcing it to find alternate routes. For the first time in weeks, the creature couldn't approach the house directly. It circled our property like a frustrated predator, occasionally testing the defenses but unable to penetrate them. Max's barking took on a different tone, still alert, but triumphant rather than terrified. We'd found a way to keep the thing at bay, but the victory was temporary. Over the following nights, the shadow grew bolder and more creative. It began throwing objects at the house, stones, branches, garbage, trying to break windows or knock down the protective barriers. It mimicked human voices calling my name from the darkness, pretending to be neighbors in distress. Most disturbing of all, it began to change tactics. Instead of its usual midnight visits, it started appearing at different times. Twilight, early morning, random hours when I might be less vigilant. It was learning, adapting, trying to catch me off guard. The psychological pressure was enormous. I barely slept for days at a time, constantly watching for signs of the creature's presence. Max was exhausted too, but he never abandoned his guard duty. My loyal dog understood better than anyone that our lives depended on maintaining constant vigilance. Then came the night when everything changed. I'd fallen asleep in my chair despite my best efforts to stay awake. Max's barking woke me around 3 a.m., but something was different. His barks were muffled, distant, as if he were far away instead of right beside me. I sat up and looked around. The living room was empty. Max was gone. I found him upstairs in what used to be Emma Hendrick's bedroom, barking frantically at the open window. The screen had been cut in exactly the same pattern as it had been 35 years ago. But Max was unharmed, still inside the house. That's when I realized what had happened. The creature had tried to take Max, knowing that without my guardian I'd be defenseless. But dogs apparently weren't what it preferred. It wanted human prey, not animal companions. The failed attempt had consequences, though. The salt lines downstairs were broken, scattered across the floor as if swept aside by powerful winds. The iron horseshoes had fallen from their positions. All my protective barriers were gone. And outside, I could hear movement. Lots of movement. Looking. Out the window, I saw not one shadow, but dozens of them, gathered in the street like an army of darkness. The collector had called for reinforcements, or perhaps other entities had been drawn by the commotion. Either way, I was now facing multiple threats instead of just one. Max pressed against my legs, trembling but still ready to fight. My brave dog had been protecting me for weeks, and now he was preparing for what might be our final stand. I thought about Mrs. Petrosky's words, about the families who had volunteered to sacrifice themselves to save others. But looking down at Max, at his loyal brown eyes full of trust and determination, I knew I couldn't give up. He was counting on me to find another solution. That's when I remembered something from my research. Not folklore this time, but actual history. There had been one family who successfully drove off the collector back in the 1960s. The Kowalski family had lived on Elm Street for 6 months, dealing with the same nightly harassment that plagued all the creature's targets. But instead of fleeing or sacrificing themselves, they had fought back. Mr. Kowalski was a veteran, and when the shadow thing began stalking his family, he'd treated it like a military operation. He'd set up lights all around his property. Floodlights, motion sensors, everything he could afford. The creatures, it seemed, couldn't tolerate bright illumination. The hardware store was closed at 3 a.m., but I had a shed full of Christmas decorations, including several strands of high-wattage LED lights. Working frantically while Max kept watch, I strung lights around every window, every door, plugging them into every available outlet. The result was spectacular. Our house lit up like a Christmas display, blazing with white light that pushed back every shadow on the property. The gathered creatures recoiled, their forms becoming wispy and indistinct in the overwhelming illumination. But they didn't leave entirely. They retreated to the edges of the light, waiting in the darkness beyond our bright perimeter. We'd created a safe zone, but it was essentially a siege. We were trapped in our own house, surrounded by predators that would wait as long as necessary, for the lights to fail or for us to make a mistake. Dawn brought temporary relief. The shadows faded with the sunrise, unable to maintain their forms in natural daylight. Max finally relaxed, curling up for a much-needed nap, while I tried to figure out our next move. I couldn't live like this indefinitely. The electric bill alone would be astronomical, and there was no guarantee the lights would hold them off permanently. I needed a permanent solution, something that would make the creatures give up and find easier prey elsewhere. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who'd complained about Max's barking, stopped by to check on us. She'd noticed our house blazing with lights all night and wanted to make sure everything was okay. Actually, I said, desperate enough to confide in anyone, I could use some help. You mentioned you've lived here for a long time. Do you remember the families who used to live in this house before me? Her expression grew troubled. Oh yes, terrible business, all those disappearances. We used to call this house cursed. What finally made it stop? There was a period in the 70s when no one lived here for almost 5 years. What changed? Mrs. Henderson thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, that was around the time they built the new subdivision over on Oak Hill. Lots of families moving in, children everywhere. I suppose whatever was bothering this house found other interests. The solution was both brilliant and horrible in its simplicity. The creatures were predators, and like all predators, they followed the path of least resistance. If I could, make our house seem like too much trouble compared to easier targets, they might move on to stalk some other unfortunate family. But I couldn't in good conscience make myself safe by putting others in danger. There had to be another way. I spent the day researching the creature's behavior patterns, looking for any weakness I could exploit. What I found was both encouraging and terrifying. The shadow entities were patient, but not immortal. They had to feed regularly to maintain their forms, and they couldn't exist indefinitely without sustaining themselves on human life force. The collector that had been stalking our neighborhood for decades was probably weakening. Its last successful hunt had been Emma Hendricks in 1987, 35 years ago. It had been surviving on scraps since then, the fear and terror of families it harassed but couldn't quite catch. That's why it had become so desperate lately, so aggressive in its attempts to breach our defenses. It was starving, and I represented its best chance at a substantial meal in decades. But hunger could be a weakness as well as a motivation. Desperate predators made mistakes, took unnecessary risks, abandoned careful strategies in favor of direct attacks. I decided to give it what it wanted, an opportunity to feed. But on my terms, not its. That night, I prepared for what I hoped would be our final confrontation. I kept most of the lights on, but created a single dark corridor from the front door to the backyard. If the creature wanted to reach me, it would have to follow that specific path, moving through areas where I could control the encounter. Max didn't like the plan. He could sense I was putting myself in danger and tried to block my way to the front door. But I needed him safe, so I locked him in the bathroom upstairs with food and water. His barking and scratching at the door broke my heart, but I couldn't risk losing him if my plan went wrong. At 11 p.m., I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. "I know you're out there," I called into the darkness. "I know you've been watching this house for decades, taking people, destroying families. I'm tired of hiding from you." The shadows seemed to thicken around the edges of the property, and I could sense multiple presences gathering just beyond the reach of my lights. "You want me? Come and get me. But it has to be fair. Just you and me. No tricks, no games. If you win, you get what you want. If I win, you leave this house alone forever." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single shadow detached itself from the darkness under the elm tree. It was the original collector, the creature that had been stalking families on our street for generations. As it approached, the other shadows melted away, apparently willing to let their leader handle this challenge personally. The thing moved slowly, cautiously, perhaps suspecting a trap, but hunger drove it forward, and soon it stood at the edge of my lit perimeter, testing the boundary between light and darkness. "Come on," I taunted, backing toward the dark corridor I'd created. "What are you waiting for? Afraid to face someone who's ready to fight back?" That did it. The creature surged forward, flowing through the darkened path like liquid shadow. But I was ready for it. As it entered the corridor, I triggered the trap I'd spent all day preparing. Every light in the house blazed to life simultaneously. Not just the Christmas lights, but every lamp, every bulb, every illuminated device I owned. I'd rewired the electrical system to channel maximum power through a network of mirrors and reflective surfaces, creating a concentrated beam of light that filled the corridor like a laser. The shadow creature hit the wall of illumination and let out a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. Part scream, part static, part the howl of wind through a graveyard. Its form began to dissolve, wispy tendrils of darkness streaming away like smoke. But it didn't die easily. Even as the light tore it apart, it lunged toward me with claws extended, trying to drag me into whatever realm such creatures called home. I dove aside, and the thing's attack struck the mirror array behind me, shattering glass and sending reflections spinning wildly around the corridor. For a moment, chaos reigned. Spinning lights, flying glass, the screaming of a creature that had terrorized families for generations. Then, abruptly, silence. The corridor was empty except for broken glass and the smell of ozone. The collector was gone. Not just retreated, but truly destroyed, its essence scattered by more light than it could absorb or deflect. I ran upstairs to free Max, who greeted me with ecstatic relief and thorough face-licking. Together, we returned to the living room window where this all began. The street was empty, normal, free of the oppressive shadows that had haunted it for so long. Max sniffed the air, tested the atmosphere with senses far more acute than mine, then wagged his tail and trotted to his favorite sleeping spot. For the first time in weeks, he seemed completely relaxed. The next morning brought confirmation of our victory. Mrs. Petrosky called, her voice filled with wonder. "I don't know what you did," she said, "but something's changed. I slept through the night for the first time in months, and Mrs. Chen down the street said her cat came out from under the bed and actually went outside. Over the following days, the entire neighborhood seemed to brighten. Children played outside after dark without their parents hovering anxiously nearby. Dogs walked their usual routes without balking at certain corners. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over our street for decades was finally gone. I kept the house, of course. After everything Max and I had been through to make it safe, it truly felt like home. But I also made sure future residents would be protected. I donated money to install better street lighting throughout the neighborhood and left detailed records with Mrs. Petrosky about what had happened, just in case anything similar ever returned. Max went back to being his normal, quiet self, though he maintained his habit of checking the living room window each night, just to be sure. Sometimes he'd wag his tail and give me a look that seemed to say, "All clear, boss, we did good." And we had done good. We'd faced something ancient and evil and won, not through sacrifice or surrender, but through courage, preparation, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. The house on Maple Street finally knew peace, and Max, my faithful guardian, could rest easy knowing he'd protected his family from the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of sight. Sometimes the barking isn't about nothing. Sometimes it's about everything that matters. Sometimes our dogs see what we cannot, and they stand guard against horrors we can't imagine. Max saw the truth from the very beginning. I should have listened to him sooner. I took a wrong turn and ended up in a town that doesn't exist. The rain had been falling for 3 hours when I missed the exit to Highway 47. By the time I realized my mistake, the storm had turned into something biblical. Sheets of water hammering my windshield so hard that my wipers couldn't keep up. The radio crackled with static, emergency broadcasts cutting in and out between bursts of white noise. Something about flash flooding, road closures, seek higher ground. I should have pulled over, should have waited it out at a gas station or diner. But I was already 6 hours into what should have been a 4-hour drive to my sister's wedding rehearsal, and I knew she'd never let me hear the end of it if I was late. So I kept driving, squinting through the darkness, following the yellow lines that seemed to writhe like snakes in my headlight beams. That's when I saw the sign. Millbrook. Population 847. I didn't remember any Millbrook on my route, but the GPS had died along with my cell service an hour ago. The turnoff looked promising. A narrow 2-lane road that curved up into the hills, away from the worst of the flooding. I figured I could cut through this little town and find my way back to the main highway on the other side. The road climbed, steadily through dense forest, the rain lessening as I gained elevation. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, their branches reaching across the asphalt like gnarled fingers. My headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, and in that tunnel, nothing else existed. Just me, the car, and the endless ribbon of wet pavement. Then the trees fell away and I saw the lights. Millbrook spread out below me in a shallow valley, a cluster of warm yellow windows glowing against the storm. It looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. White church steeple, main street lined with old-fashioned storefronts, houses with wraparound porches and picket fences. The kind of place that probably still had a soda fountain and a barber shop with a spinning pole. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in hours. Civilization. Maybe I could grab a cup of coffee, ask for directions, use a landline to call my sister and explain why I was running late. The road curved down into the town proper, past a sign that read, "Welcome to Millbrook, America's friendliest town, East T 1847. Someone had planted flower. Boxes beneath it, though I couldn't make out what was growing there in the darkness. Main Street was wider than I'd expected, with diagonal parking spaces and old-fashioned lampposts that cast pools of yellow light every 30 feet. Most of the businesses were closed. It was nearly 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night, but I could see people moving behind the windows of what looked like a diner. The neon sign out front buzzed and flickered. Mel's Eats. I pulled into a parking space and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The rain had stopped completely, which seemed impossible given the storm I'd just driven through. When I rolled down my window, the air smelled clean and fresh like it does after a summer shower. No trace of the humid, oppressive atmosphere I'd left behind on the highway. The silence was absolute. No traffic sounds, no distant hum of air conditioners or televisions, just the soft drip of water from the eaves of buildings and the whisper of wind through the leaves of the massive oak trees that lined the street. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the diner. A bell chimed as I pushed through the door, and every head in the place turned to look at me. There were maybe a dozen people scattered among the red vinyl booths and chrome-legged stools at the counter. All of them wore the same expression, mild, curiosity tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Not unfriendliness exactly, but not warmth either. "Evening," said the waitress behind the counter. She was maybe 60, with steel gray hair pinned up in a neat bun and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. "Just passing through," I said, settling onto one of the counter stools. "Got turned around in the storm. I was hoping I could get some coffee and maybe use your phone to call my family." The waitress, her name tag read Dolores, poured coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Eisenhower administration. "Phone's been out since the storm," she said. "Lines are down all over the county." I nodded and sipped the coffee. It was surprisingly good, rich and strong, with just a hint of chicory. "How about directions? I'm trying to get to Highway 47 and my GPS crapped out somewhere back in the forest." Dolores exchanged a glance with a man sitting at the far end of the counter. He was thin and pale, wearing a flannel shirt that had seen better days. When he looked at me, his eyes were the color of old pewter. "Afraid you can't get there from here," Dolores said. "Not tonight anyway. Bridge is out. Has been for, must be going on 3 months now. County keeps saying they'll fix it, but you know how these things go." "There has to be another way," I said. "I came in on that road up there." I pointed vaguely toward the hills. "Miller's Pass," said the man in flannel. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "That's the only way in or out, and it's blocked about 2 miles up. Rockslide took out the bridge back in March." I felt a flutter of unease in my chest, but I just drove that road 20 minutes ago. There was no rockslide. The conversation in the diner had stopped completely. Everyone was listening now, their faces turned toward me with that same odd expression. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the slow tick of a clock on the wall behind the counter. "Must have been a different road," Dolores said finally. "Easy to get confused in the dark, especially with all this rain we've been having." I wanted to argue, but I was tired and confused, and the coffee was making me feel more human. Maybe I had taken a different route. The storm had been so bad, and I'd been so focused on just staying on the road, that it was possible I'd gotten more turned around than I'd realized. "Is there a motel in town?" I asked. "Somewhere I can stay the night. I'll figure out how to get back on track in the morning." "Martha's got rooms," said a woman in a blue dress who was sitting in one of the booths. "Just up the street. Clean, beds, reasonable rates." "Martha's been closed for years," the man in flannel said quietly. "Since her husband died." The woman in blue looked confused for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Oh, that's right, I forgot." She turned back to her pie as if nothing had happened. "You can stay at my place," Dolores offered. "Got a spare room upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and dry." I hesitated. Something about the whole situation felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The people seemed friendly enough, if a little strange, and I really didn't have much choice. I was exhausted, it was nearly midnight, and I was apparently stranded until I could find my way back to the main road. "That's very kind of you," I said. "I'd be happy to pay." Dolores waved away my offer. "Nonsense, we look after travelers here, it's the Millbrook way." She poured me another cup of coffee and told me about the town while I finished it. Founded in 1847 by German immigrants, she said. Named after the mill that used to sit by the creek on the east side of town. Used to be a thriving community, lumber and farming mostly. But the young people had been leaving for years, drawn to the cities and their promises of opportunity. Population's been dropping steady since the 60s, she said. Down to about 400 now, though that sign out there hasn't been updated in years. Most of us who are left are getting on in years. Not many children around anymore. As she talked, I found myself studying the other customers. Now that I looked more closely, she was right. They were all middle-aged or older. The youngest person in the place looked to be in their 40s, and most were considerably older than that. Their clothes were clean but dated, like they'd been purchased decades ago and carefully maintained. The whole scene had a timeless quality, as if I had stepped back into the 1950s. When I finished my coffee, Dolores led me upstairs to a small apartment above the diner. The spare room was exactly as advertised. Clean and simple, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over Main Street. She gave me a fresh towel and told me the bathroom was down the hall. "Breakfast starts at 6, she said. "But don't feel like you have to get up that early. Sleep as long as you need to." After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of my situation. I'd definitely taken a wrong turn somewhere, but Millbrook seemed real enough. The coffee had been real, the people had been real, and the bed felt solid beneath me. Maybe the locals were confused about the bridge being out. It wouldn't be the first time small-town gossip had gotten mixed up with the facts. I decided to worry about it in the morning. Right now, all I wanted was sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself thinking about the drive into town. I could swear I remembered the road being clear, no sign of any rock slide or washed-out bridge. And the transition from the storm to the calm night air in Millbrook had been so abrupt, so complete, that it felt almost unnatural. I got up and looked out the window. Main Street was empty now, the lampposts casting their yellow pools of light on wet pavement. The storefronts looked even more dated from this angle. Hand-painted signs advertising things like genuine leather goods and fresh penny candy. There was something deeply unsettling about the perfection of it all, like a movie set or a theme park recreation of small-town America. That's when I noticed the newspaper box on the corner. I couldn't read the date from this distance, but something about it nagged at me. I'd seen dozens of those old-style newspaper boxes in antique shops and flea markets, the kind with the coin slot and the heavy metal door. Nobody used them anymore. Everything went digital years ago. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking things. Plenty of small towns still did things the old-fashioned way. Hell, some places still had milk delivery and barbers who made house calls. There was nothing inherently sinister about a newspaper box. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I must have dozed off sometime around 3, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window, and I could hear the sounds of activity from the street below. When I checked my watch, it was nearly 9 a.m. I dressed quickly and headed downstairs. The diner was busy now, filled with the breakfast crowd, farmers in work shirts and overalls, elderly women in floral print dresses, a few men in suits that looked like they'd been tailored in 1955. The conversations were quiet and polite, punctuated by the clink of silverware on plates and the gentle hiss of the coffee pot. Dolores was behind the counter, looking exactly as she had the night before. She smiled when she saw me, that same expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sleep well?" she asked, already pouring coffee without being asked. "Like a rock," I lied. "Thanks again for putting me up. What do I owe you?" "Nothing at all. But you look like you could use some breakfast. Eggs and bacon, toast." My stomach growled in response, and I realized I hadn't eaten since lunch the previous day. That sounds perfect. While I waited for my food, I studied the other customers more carefully. In the daylight, the anachronistic quality of the place was even more pronounced. The men's hair was slicked back with pomade, parted sharp and high. The women wore their hair in careful waves and victory rolls. Even their posture seemed different, straighter, more formal, like they were all posing for photographs. "Excuse me," I said to the man sitting next to me at the counter. He was maybe 70, with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I was wondering if you could help me with directions. I need to get back to Highway 47. The man set down his coffee cup and turned to face me. "Highway 47? Can't say I'm familiar with that one. Where's it run?" "North-south, about 20 miles east of here. Connects to the interstate." He shook his head slowly. "Son, there's no interstate within 100 miles of Millbrook. Nearest 4-lane highway is Route 34, and that's clear over in the next county." I felt that flutter of unease again, stronger this time. "Route 34? I've never heard of Route 34. Been there since they built it back in '58, the man said. "Runs from Cooperstown down to the state line. You sure you're not thinking of that?" I was about to respond when Dolores appeared with my breakfast. Eggs over easy, thick-cut bacon, toast made from bread that looked like it had been baked fresh that morning. The food smelled incredible, and despite my growing anxiety, I found myself digging in with enthusiasm. "This is delicious," I said around a mouthful of eggs. "Do you bake your own bread?" "Of course," Dolores said, as if the question surprised her. "Everybody makes their own bread. Why would you buy it from a store?" I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. When was the last time I'd met someone who baked their own bread regularly? My grandmother, maybe, back when I was a kid. But that was 30 years ago. "What year is it?" I asked suddenly. The entire diner went quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every fork was set down. Every coffee cup remained suspended halfway to its owner's lips. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, broken only by the tick of that clock on the wall and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere outside. "What kind of question is that?" Dolores asked finally, her voice carefully neutral. I'm a little confused about where I am, and when." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the edge creeping in. "Can you just tell me what year it is?" "It's 1953, said the old man next to me. "October 15th, 1953. The fork slipped from my numb fingers and clattered against the plate. Around me, the other diners had resumed their conversations and their meals as if nothing unusual had happened. But I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Why is it impossible?" Dolores asked. She was still smiling, that smile that didn't reach her eyes. I couldn't answer. How do you explain cell phones and GPS and the internet to people who apparently think Eisenhower is president? How do you tell them that their town shouldn't exist? That the world they're living in ended 70 years ago? I stood up so quickly that my stool scraped against the floor. "I need to go. I need to get back to my car." "Of course," Dolores said. "But you should finish your breakfast first. It's the most important meal of the day." I'm not hungry anymore. I threw a $20 bill on the counter. At least I tried to. But when I looked down at the money in my hand, it wasn't the crisp new bills I remembered putting in my wallet the night before. Instead, I was holding old paper money, the kind with smaller portraits and different designs. The 20 looked like something from a museum display. I dropped the money and ran. Outside, Main Street looked exactly as it had the night before, except now I could see it clearly in the morning sunlight. The storefronts were immaculate, their windows sparkling clean and their signs freshly painted, but the styles were all wrong. Everything looked like it belonged in a history book or a period movie. There were cars parked along the street, but they were all classics, 40s and 50s models with chrome bumpers and white wall tires. Not restored classics, but cars that looked like they'd just rolled off the assembly line. A man in a fedora walked past, tipping his hat to me politely. A woman in a floral dress was pushing a baby carriage, cooing to the infant inside. It was like stepping into a time capsule. I found my car where I'd left it, looking absurdly modern next to the vintage automobiles surrounding it. But when I tried to start it, nothing happened. The engine didn't even turn over. The dashboard was dark, the radio silent. Having trouble? I turned to find a man standing beside the car. He was tall and thin, dressed in coveralls with Pete's Garage embroidered on the chest pocket. His smile was friendly, but his eyes had that same unsettling quality I'd noticed in the others. "Car won't start," I said. "I don't understand it. It was running fine last night." "These modern cars," Pete said, shaking his head. "All those computers and electronics. Give me a good old-fashioned engine any day. Want me to take a look?" He popped the hood before I could answer and poked around for a few minutes, making thoughtful humming sounds. Finally, he straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Well, there's your problem," he said. "Looks like something fried your electrical system. Probably happened during that storm last night. Lightning can do funny things to modern electronics. Can you fix it?" Pete scratched his head. "I can try, but I'll need to order some parts. Might take a few days, maybe a week. These new cars are pretty complicated. A few days, maybe a week." The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought about my sister's wedding, about my job, about the life I'd left behind when I took that wrong turn. How long had I been gone already? Hours? Days? Did time even work the same way here? "In the meantime," Pete continued, "you're welcome to stay in town. Folks here are real friendly, will take good care of you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him and demand to know what was happening to me. Instead, I heard myself saying, "That's very kind of you." Pete smiled that empty smile and went back to his garage. I stood beside my car, trying to think of options. I could walk, but where would I go? According to the locals, the only road out of town was blocked. Even if it wasn't, I had no idea which direction would take me back to familiar territory. I could try to find another phone, but Dolores had said the lines were down. And even if I could get through to someone, what would I tell them? That I'd somehow driven 70 years into the past, that I was trapped in a town full of people who seemed to think Eisenhower was president. As I stood there trying to make sense of my situation, I noticed something else that made my blood run cold. There were no children anywhere. Not playing in the yards, not walking to school, not even visible through the windows of the houses. Dolores had mentioned that there weren't many children around anymore, but this was different. This was complete absence. I started walking, exploring the town more systematically. Millbrook was bigger than it had seemed the night before. Block after block of well-maintained houses with neat yards and white picket fences. But the deeper I went into the residential areas, the more unsettled I became. The houses were perfect. Too perfect. Every lawn was precisely manicured. Every flower bed was immaculate. Every porch swing was positioned at exactly the right angle. It was like a magazine spread or a model train layout or a movie set. That's when I started noticing the other details. The newspapers in the driveways were all perfectly positioned, as if they'd been placed rather than thrown. The mail in the mailboxes looked fresh, but when I got close enough to read the postmarks, they were all from October 1953. The same date, over and over again. And the people I passed on the sidewalks, they all seemed to be going somewhere, but their routes never varied. I watched one woman walk from her house to the corner store, buy something, and walk back home. 15 minutes later, she did exactly the same thing. Same pace, same path, same item purchased. I followed a man in a business suit for 6 blocks. He walked with purpose, briefcase in hand, like he was late for an important meeting. But he never reached a destination. He just walked in a large circle, past the same houses, past the same landmarks, until he was back where he started. Then, he began the circuit again. None of them seemed to notice me watching. By late afternoon, I was back on Main Street, no closer to understanding what was happening to me. The sun was getting low, and the quality of light was starting to change. Soon it would be evening again, and I'd have been trapped here for 24 hours. I went back into the diner hoping to find some answers. Dolores was behind the counter just as she had been that morning, just as she had been the night before. When she saw me, she smiled that same smile. "Back for dinner?" she asked. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to give me a straight answer." Her smile faltered slightly. "Of course." "What happened to this town? The real Millbrook, I mean. Not this, whatever this is." For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she sighed and poured herself a cup of coffee. Her hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly. "You don't remember, do you?" she said finally. "Remember what?" "The accident." The word hit me like a sledgehammer. Suddenly, I was back in my car, driving through the storm. Rain hammering the windshield, wipers struggling to keep up, the radio crackling with emergency broadcasts, and then... "The bridge," I whispered. "Miller's Pass Bridge," Dolores confirmed. "You took the curve too fast, hydroplaned right through the guardrail." The memories came flooding back. The moment when the steering wheel went loose in my hands, the sensation of weightlessness as the car went airborne, the sound of metal crushing against rocks as we tumbled down the ravine. "But that's impossible," I said. "I'm here, I'm talking to you." "Are you?" Dolores asked gently. I looked down at my hands. They seemed solid enough, real enough. But when I tried to remember the sensation of eating breakfast that morning, or the feeling of the coffee cup in my fingers, I found nothing. No tactile memories at all. "How long?" I asked. "The accident happened in March, 3 months ago." "And Millbrook?" "Millbrook was evacuated in 1954, she said. Government project. They were building a dam downstream, and the whole valley was going to flood. Gave everybody 6 months to relocate. So the town is at the bottom of Miller's Lake. Has been for 70 years. I closed my eyes and tried to process this information. "Then what is this place?" "I think you know," Dolores said. I did know, though I didn't want to admit it. This was the place where lost souls go. The place where people who die confused and frightened end up creating their own reality from fragments of memory and desire. A place that looks like somewhere safe, somewhere welcoming, somewhere that makes sense even when nothing else does. "The other people," I said. "The ones walking in circles, repeating the same actions. They've been here longer than you. Some of them since the town was actually evacuated. They're stuck, locked into patterns they can't break." "And you?" Dolores smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "I chose to stay. Somebody has to help the new arrivals. Somebody has to explain things when they're ready to hear the truth. So what happens now? That's up to you. You can accept what happened and move on to whatever comes next." Or you can stay here in this version of Millbrook that exists only in your mind. A lot of people choose to stay. It's comfortable here, safe, predictable. I thought about my sister's wedding, about the job I'd been driving toward, about all the things I'd never get to do or say or experience. The weight of that loss was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Relief, maybe, or acceptance. If I choose to move on, I said, what happens to this place? It fades, like a dream when you wake up. And the other people, they'll find their own way eventually, or they won't. That's not your choice to make. I sat there for a long time wrestling with the decision. Part of me wanted to stay in this perfect little town where nothing ever changed and nothing bad could happen. But I knew that wasn't really living. It was just hiding. I want to go, I said finally. Dolores nodded. I thought you might. You're stronger than most. What do I do? Just let go. Stop trying to hold on to this place, this reality. Accept what happened and trust that whatever comes next will be okay. I closed my eyes and tried to relax, to release my grip on the diner and the town and the impossible world I'd created to avoid facing the truth. It was harder than I'd expected. The fear of the unknown, of whatever lay beyond death, was almost overwhelming. But gradually, I felt the edges of Millbrook beginning to blur. The sounds of the diner grew distant, the smell of coffee and bacon faded, and the warmth of the afternoon sun through the windows dimmed to nothing. The last thing I heard was Dolores's voice, soft and kind. Safe travels. Then there was light. Not the harsh light of the diner's fluorescence, but something warm and welcoming and infinitely peaceful. I moved toward it without fear, finally ready to discover what lay beyond the wrong turn that had brought me to a town that doesn't exist. Behind me, Millbrook dissolved like sugar in rain, taking with it the last of my earthly confusion and fear. Ahead was mystery, but it no longer frightened me. Whatever was waiting, I would face it with clear eyes and an open heart. The road goes on forever, but sometimes the most important journey is learning when to stop walking in circles and take the next step into the unknown. The house at the end. Of the road watches everyone who visits. The first time Sarah noticed the house, she was walking her dog Max through the new neighborhood they'd moved to 3 weeks prior. Maple Street curved gently for about half a mile before dead-ending at what appeared to be an abandoned Victorian mansion, its weathered gray siding and sagging wraparound porch suggesting decades of neglect. What struck her wasn't the house's obvious decay, but the feeling that something behind those dark windows was watching her approach. Max whimpered and pulled against his leash, refusing to go any closer than the rusted mailbox that read 1847 Maple Street in faded letters. Sarah found herself counting the windows, 13 on the front face alone, each one reflecting the late afternoon sun like watchful eyes. She shivered despite the September warmth and allowed Max to lead her back home. That evening, she mentioned the house to her husband David over dinner. There's this old place at the end of our street. Looks like it's been empty for years. I'm surprised they haven't torn it down for development. David looked up from his pasta. The Victorian? I drove past it when I was checking out the neighborhood before we bought. Real estate agent said it's been on the market for decades. Apparently no one stays interested long enough to close. Why not? Historic homes usually sell well, especially in areas like this. Something about the inspection reports. Every potential buyer brings in contractors and they all refuse to finish the job. Won't say why, just pack up and leave. David shrugged. Probably foundation issues or asbestos. You know how those old houses can be. But Sarah suspected it was something else entirely. Over the following days, she found herself drawn back to that end of the street. Each morning walk with Max became an exercise in curiosity and dread. The house seemed different each time she visited. Sometimes the front door appeared slightly ajar when she was certain it had been closed the day before, or she'd notice curtains and windows that had been bare, as if someone was gradually furnishing the interior. The strangest detail was the garden. Despite the house's obvious abandonment, the front yard maintained an unsettling perfection. The hedges were precisely trimmed, the flower beds showed no weeds, and the grass remained evenly cut. Yet Sarah never saw any maintenance crew, never heard the sound of mowers or trimmers. The garden simply persisted in its manicured state, as if tended by invisible hands. One Thursday morning, she encountered Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived 2 blocks over, also walking her small terrier near the house. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Mrs. Chen said, but her eyes kept drifting toward the Victorian mansion. "Yes, lovely," Sarah replied. "I've been wondering about that house. Do you know anything about its history?" Mrs. Chen's expression tightened. "You're new to the neighborhood." "Just moved in 3 weeks ago. I'm Sarah. Eleanor Chen. I've lived here 42 years. She paused, studying Sarah's face. "That house, it's been empty since before I arrived, but it wasn't always empty. The Blackwood family lived there once. Mother, father, 3 children. This was back in the 1950s, according to my late husband. One winter, they just disappeared. All 5 of them vanished without a trace. What happened to them? Nobody knows. Police investigated, found no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Their belongings were still in the house. Dinner, half-eaten on the table. Beds turned down for the night. It was as if they simply stepped out of existence." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "And no one's lived there since?" "Oh, people have tried. Every few years someone new buys it or rents it. They never stay long. Usually just a few days, sometimes a week. Then they leave in the middle of the night, often abandoning their belongings." Mrs. Chen's terrier began pulling her away from the house. "There have been incidents over the years. Nothing the police could prove, but enough to keep most people away." "What kind of incidents?" But Mrs. Chen was already walking briskly in the opposite direction, her dog eager to put distance between them and the Victorian mansion. "Just be careful, dear," she called over her shoulder. "Some houses have long memories." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Blackwood family, imagining 5 people going about their evening routine, unaware that they were about to vanish forever. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The window above the sink faced east, toward the end of Maple Street. The house was lit up. Every window glowed with warm, golden light, as if a family was home, moving from room to room, living their lives in the middle of the night. Sarah rubbed her eyes, certain she was seeing things, but the lights remained. She could even make out shadows moving behind the curtains, figures walking through the rooms, going about some midnight routine. She watched for nearly an hour before the lights began to dim, one window at a time, until the house returned to its usual darkness. By morning, she had almost convinced herself it had been a dream. The next evening, David worked late at the office, leaving Sarah alone with Max. Despite her growing unease about the house, she felt compelled to walk past it again. The September sun was setting earlier now, casting long shadows across Maple Street as she approached the dead end. This time, she noticed something she had missed before: a small path that led around the side of the house, partially hidden by overgrown lilac bushes. Without quite deciding to do so, she found herself following it, Max reluctantly trailing behind. The path led to a backyard that was even more disturbing than the front. While the front garden maintained its supernatural perfection, the back was wild and overgrown, as if nature was trying to reclaim the space. Ancient apple trees dropped rotting fruit that no one collected. Weeds grew waist-high around what had once been a children's play area. She could make out the rusted frame of a swing set and the weathered remains of a sandbox. What do I do? Just let go. Stop trying to hold on to this place, this reality. Accept what happened and trust that whatever comes next will be okay. I closed my eyes and tried to relax, to release my grip on the diner and the town and the impossible world I'd created to avoid facing the truth. It was harder than I'd expected. The fear of the unknown, of whatever lay beyond death, was almost overwhelming. But gradually, I felt the edges of Millbrook beginning to blur. The sounds of the diner grew distant, the smell of coffee and bacon faded, and the warmth of the afternoon sun through the windows dimmed to nothing. The last thing I heard was Dolores's voice, soft and kind. Safe travels. Then there was light. Not the harsh light of the diner's fluorescence, but something warm and welcoming and infinitely peaceful. I moved toward it without fear, finally ready to discover what lay beyond the wrong turn that had brought me to a town that doesn't exist. Behind me, Millbrook dissolved like sugar in rain, taking with it the last of my earthly confusion and fear. Ahead was mystery, but it no longer frightened me. Whatever was waiting, I would face it with clear eyes and an open heart. The road goes on forever, but sometimes the most important journey is learning when to stop walking in circles and take the next step into the unknown. The house at the end. Of the road watches everyone who visits. The first time Sarah noticed the house, she was walking her dog Max through the new neighborhood they'd moved to 3 weeks prior. Maple Street curved gently for about half a mile before dead-ending at what appeared to be an abandoned Victorian mansion, its weathered gray siding and sagging wraparound porch suggesting decades of neglect. What struck her wasn't the house's obvious decay, but the feeling that something behind those dark windows was watching her approach. Max whimpered and pulled against his leash, refusing to go any closer than the rusted mailbox that read 1847 Maple Street in faded letters. Sarah found herself counting the windows, 13 on the front face alone, each one reflecting the late afternoon sun like watchful eyes. She shivered despite the September warmth and allowed Max to lead her back home. That evening, she mentioned the house to her husband David over dinner. "There's this old place at the end of our street. Looks like it's been empty for years. I'm surprised they haven't torn it down for development." David looked up from his pasta. "The Victorian? I drove past it when I was checking out the neighborhood before we bought. Real estate agent said it's been on the market for decades. Apparently no one stays interested long enough to close. Why not? Historic homes usually sell well, especially in areas like this. Something about the inspection reports. Every potential buyer brings in contractors and they all refuse to finish the job. Won't say why, just pack up and leave." David shrugged. "Probably foundation issues or asbestos. You know how those old houses can be." But Sarah suspected it was something else entirely. Over the following days, she found herself drawn back to that end of the street. Each morning walk with Max became an exercise in curiosity and dread. The house seemed different each time she visited. Sometimes the front door appeared slightly ajar when she was certain it had been closed the day before, or she'd notice curtains and windows that had been bare, as if someone was gradually furnishing the interior. The strangest detail was the garden. Despite the house's obvious abandonment, the front yard maintained an unsettling perfection. The hedges were precisely trimmed, the flower beds showed no weeds, and the grass remained evenly cut. Yet Sarah never saw any maintenance crew, never heard the sound of mowers or trimmers. The garden simply persisted in its manicured state, as if tended by invisible hands. One Thursday morning, she encountered Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived 2 blocks over, also walking her small terrier near the house. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Mrs. Chen said, but her eyes kept drifting toward the Victorian mansion. Yes, lovely, Sarah replied. I've been wondering about that house. Do you know anything about its history? Mrs. Chen's expression tightened. You're new to the neighborhood. Just moved in 3 weeks ago. I'm Sarah. Eleanor Chen. I've lived here 42 years. She paused, studying Sarah's face. That house, it's been empty since before I arrived, but it wasn't always empty. The Blackwood family lived there once. Mother, father, 3 children. This was back in the 1950s, according to my late husband. One winter, they just disappeared. All 5 of them vanished without a trace. What happened to them? Nobody knows. Police investigated, found no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Their belongings were still in the house. Dinner, half-eaten on the table. Beds turned down for the night. It was as if they simply stepped out of existence. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. And no one's lived there since? Oh, people have tried. Every few years, someone new buys it or rents it. They never stay long. Usually just a few days, sometimes a week. Then they leave in the middle of the night, often abandoning their belongings. Mrs. Chen's terrier began pulling her away from the house. There have been incidents over the years. Nothing the police could prove, but enough to keep most people away. What kind of incidents? But Mrs. Chen was already walking briskly in the opposite direction, her dog eager to put distance between them and the Victorian mansion. Just be careful, dear, she called over her shoulder. Some houses have long memories. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Blackwood family, imagining 5 people going about their evening routine, unaware that they were about to vanish forever. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The window above the sink faced east, toward the end of Maple Street. The house was lit up. Every window glowed with warm, golden light, as if a family was home, moving from room to room, living their lives in the middle of the night. Sarah rubbed her eyes, certain she was seeing things, but the lights remained. She could even make out shadows moving behind the curtains, figures walking through the rooms, going about some midnight routine. She watched for nearly an hour before the lights began to dim, one window at a time, until the house returned to its usual darkness. By morning, she had almost convinced herself it had been a dream. The next evening, David worked late at the office, leaving Sarah alone with Max. Despite her growing unease about the house, she felt compelled to walk past it again. The September sun was setting earlier now, casting long shadows across Maple Street as she approached the dead end. This time, she noticed something she had missed before. A small path that led around the side of the house, partially hidden by overgrown lilac bushes. Without quite deciding to do so, she found herself following it, Max reluctantly trailing behind. The path led to a backyard that was even more disturbing than the front. While the front garden maintained its supernatural perfection, the back was wild and overgrown, as if nature was trying to reclaim the space. Ancient apple trees dropped rotting fruit that no one collected. Weeds grew waist-high around what had once been a children's play area. She could make out the rusted frame of a swing set and the weathered remains of a sandbox. But it was the back of the house itself that made her stomach lurch. Unlike the front, which maintained some semblance of structural integrity, the rear showed signs of violence. Windows were boarded up haphazardly, as if in great haste. The back door hung at an odd angle, revealing a slice of absolute darkness beyond. And there, carved deep into the wooden siding beside the door, were scratch marks, dozens of them gouged into the wood as if by desperate fingernails. Max began to whine, then bark, then howl with a sound Sarah had never heard him make before. The noise seemed to echo strangely in the enclosed space of the backyard, bouncing off the house and returning distorted, as if the building itself was answering. That's when she heard it. A sound from inside the house. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across what sounded like wooden floors. The footsteps paused, as if whoever was walking had stopped to listen to Max's howling. Then they resumed, growing closer to the back door. Sarah grabbed Max's leash and ran, crashing through the overgrown garden and around the side of the house, not stopping until she reached the street. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe, and Max continued to whimper even after they were safely back on the sidewalk. As they hurried toward home, Sarah made the mistake of looking back. There, in one of the second-floor windows, she saw a face, pale, indistinct, but unmistakably human. It watched them retreat until they turned the corner and the house disappeared from view. That night, she told David everything. About the lights she had seen, about Mrs. Chen's story of the missing family, about the face in the window. David listened patiently, occasionally nodding, but she could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Honey, I think you're letting your imagination run away with you. Old houses always seem spooky, especially when you're alone. And that face you saw, probably just a reflection of clouds or a trick of the light. David, I know what I saw. I'm not saying you didn't see something. I'm just saying there's probably a rational explanation. Maybe we should drive by together this weekend in broad daylight. I bet it won't seem nearly as mysterious." But Sarah knew that wouldn't help. The house's strangeness wasn't limited to nighttime or solitary visits. It was something fundamental about the place itself, something that had nothing to do with lighting or imagination. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made everything look ominous. David suggested they take their coffee and walk to the end of the street together, treating it like an adventure rather than an investigation. Sarah agreed, hoping that having him there would make her feel safer. As they approached the house, David's casual chatter gradually faded into silence. The building seemed even more imposing in the overcast light, its windows dark and reflective as mirrors. The perfect garden looked artificial against the wild sky, like a movie set waiting for actors who would never arrive. "I see what you mean," David admitted quietly. "There's something off about it." They stood at the end of the street for several minutes, both staring at the house. Sarah was about to suggest they head home when David pointed to one of the ground floor windows. "Is that a for sale sign?" Sarah looked where he was pointing. There, barely visible through the window, was indeed a small realtor's sign propped against the glass from the inside. "That wasn't there before," she said. "Are you sure? Maybe you just didn't notice it." But Sarah was certain. She had studied every detail of the house's facade over the past 2 weeks. The sign was new. David was already pulling out his phone. "I'm curious about the listing. Maybe we can find out more about its history." 20 minutes later, they were back home with a phone number for Morrison Real Estate. David called while Sarah listened on speaker. "Morrison Real Estate, Janet speaking." "Hi, I'm calling about the property at 1847 Maple Street. Is it still available?" There was a long pause. "May I ask how you heard about that listing?" "My wife and I live on the same street. We noticed a for sale sign in the window." Another pause, longer this time. "Sir, I need to be honest with you. That property, well, it has a complicated history. Are you seriously interested in viewing it?" "We might be." "I have to ask, have you researched the house at all? Talked to any of the neighbors?" David glanced at Sarah. "We've heard a few stories." "Then you know it's had some challenges. I've been trying to sell that house for 15 years, and I've yet to complete a successful transaction. Every potential buyer either backs out during the inspection period or..." She trailed off. "Or what?" or they stop returning my calls. Look, if you're really interested, I can show it to you, but I won't take your money for a full inspection until you've spent at least one night in the property. That's my policy now after what happened with the Hendersons. What happened with the Hendersons? They put in a full-price offer sight unseen, said they loved Victorian architecture and didn't care about the rumors. Moved in on a Tuesday. By Friday, their neighbors were calling to report screaming. Police found the house empty, all their belongings still there, dinner burning on the stove. They'd been gone for hours, but their car was still in the driveway, keys on the kitchen counter. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. Did they ever find them? 3 days later, the husband showed up at my office. Wouldn't say where he'd been, wouldn't explain what happened. Just signed papers to void the sale and left town that same day. His wife, she was found 2 weeks later, wandering downtown with no memory of the previous month. Had to be hospitalized. David and Sarah exchanged looks. This was far more serious than local ghost stories. So, Janet continued, if you're still interested in viewing the property, I can meet you there tomorrow afternoon. But I won't do it after dark, and I won't go in alone. Despite every rational part of her brain screaming in protest, Sarah found herself nodding at David. We'll be there at 2 o'clock. After they hung up, they sat in their kitchen in silence for several minutes. We don't have to do this, David finally said. Yes, we do. I need to know what's happening in that house. It's been driving me crazy for 2 weeks. Sarah, what if the stories are true? What if something really dangerous is going on there? Then we'll leave. But I have to see for myself. That night, Sarah dreamed she was standing in the backyard of the Victorian house. But it was daytime and the yard was beautifully maintained. Children were playing on the swing set. 2 boys and a girl, all with dark hair and pale skin. They were laughing and calling to someone inside the house. Mama, come push us higher. A woman appeared at the back door, young and pretty, wearing a 1950s style dress. She waved at the children and started walking toward the swing set. But as she got closer, her expression changed. The smile faded from her face, replaced by a look of growing horror. Children, she called, her voice tight with fear. Children, come inside. Come inside right now. The children continued playing, as if they couldn't hear her. The woman began to run toward them, but with each step the distance between them seemed to grow. She was running and calling, tears streaming down her face, but she could never reach them. Behind her, the house began to change. The windows darkened. The walls seemed to pulse like something alive. And from inside came a sound, a low, rhythmic thumping like a massive heartbeat. Sarah woke gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat. Beside her, David slept peacefully, unaware of her distress. She checked the clock, 3:17 a.m. Without quite knowing why, she got up and went to the kitchen window that faced toward the end of the street. The house was lit up again, every window glowing. But this time she could see figures moving inside more clearly. A family going about their nightly routine. Parents and children moving from room to room. She watched a woman pass by an upstairs window, carrying what looked like a tray. In another window, she saw children playing some kind of game, their shadows dancing against the curtains. It looked so normal, so alive, that for a moment Sarah felt a wave of relief. Maybe the house wasn't abandoned after all. Maybe someone had finally moved in, and all the stories were just neighborhood gossip. But then she remembered Janet's words about the last family who had tried to live there, and her relief turned to dread. What if these weren't new residents, but the same shadows that had been moving through the house for decades? What if the Blackwood family had never really left? The next afternoon, Sarah and David met Janet Morrison at the end of Maple Street. The real estate agent was a small, nervous woman in her 50s carrying a briefcase that looked too heavy for her frame. I have to tell you, she said as they approached the house. "I've been dreading this all morning. I don't show this property often, and never without a very good reason." "What kind of reason?" Sarah asked. "Usually someone in the family has died and left it to relatives who don't know the history. Or occasionally developers think they can bulldoze it and start fresh. They always change their minds after spending a few hours here." The house looked different in the afternoon light, smaller somehow, less imposing. But Sarah noticed that Janet stayed well back from the front door as she searched through her keys. "Before we go in," Janet said, "I need you to promise me something. If I say we're leaving, we leave immediately. No questions, no arguments. I've learned not to ignore my instincts about this place." They agreed, and Janet led them up the front porch steps. The wooden boards creaked ominously under their weight, and Sarah noticed that some of the porch railings were carved with the same scratch marks she had seen on the back of the house. The front door opened with surprising ease, revealing a foyer that was both beautiful and unsettling. The original hardwood floors were in perfect condition, as if they had been maintained regularly despite the house's abandonment. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor, its banister polished to a deep shine. Everything was clean, dust-free, as if someone had just finished preparing the house for their visit. "Who maintains the interior?" David asked. Janet looked uncomfortable. That's one of the things I can't explain. The house always looks like this when I show it. No matter how much time passes between visits, there's never any dust, never any signs of deterioration. Sometimes I think someone must have keys, but I've changed the lock 6 times over the years." They moved through the ground floor, living room, dining room, kitchen, study. Each room was furnished with period-appropriate pieces that looked as if they had been purchased yesterday. In the kitchen, the table was set for 5, with plates and glasses arranged as if a family was expected for dinner. "The furniture comes with the house," Janet explained. "It belonged to the original owners. Every time someone moves it out, it reappears." Sarah ran her finger along the dining room table, not a speck of dust. "Janet, this is going to sound strange, but has anyone ever reported seeing lights in the house at night?" The real estate agent stopped walking. "Why do you ask?" "I live on this street. I've seen the windows lit up several times, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning." Janet's face went pale. "You need to stop walking past this house at night." "Why?" "Because that's when they come back." "They?" "The Blackwood family. At least that's what people report seeing. Every few months someone calls to tell me there are people living in the house without permission. When I come to check, it's always empty, but..." She gestured around them. "But it's always been recently lived in." They climbed the staircase to the second floor. Here the atmosphere felt heavier, more oppressive. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, given the house's external dimensions, and the doors to the bedrooms stood slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of neatly made beds and children's toys. In the master bedroom, Sarah noticed a framed photograph on the nightstand. A family portrait showing 2 parents and 3 children, all dressed in 1950s clothing. The faces were clear enough to recognize, and Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized these were the same people she had seen in her dream. "Is this the Blackwood family?" she asked. Janet nodded. "That photograph has been in this room since I started representing the property. I've tried removing it several times, but it always comes back." David was examining the family portrait more closely. "They look happy," he said. "They were, according to the neighbors who remember them. Model family, very involved in the community, which makes their disappearance even more mysterious." They finished touring the upstairs bedrooms, a nursery that still smelled faintly of baby powder, 2 children's rooms with toys arranged as if their owners had just stepped out to play, and a spare room that contained nothing but a rocking chair position to face the window overlooking the backyard. As they prepared to leave, Sarah asked the question that had been building in her mind all afternoon. "Janet, what do you really think happened to them?" The real estate agent was quiet for a long moment, looking around the master bedroom one last time. "I think," she said finally, "that they're still here. I think they never left at all." That evening, David and Sarah sat in their living room trying to process what they had experienced. The house had been unsettling, certainly, but not in any way they could rationally explain. It was clean, well-maintained, and filled with beautiful antiques. If not for the stories and the strange details, it would have been a dream property. "What if we made an offer?" David said suddenly. Sarah stared at him. "Are you serious? Think about it. The price has to be incredibly low after sitting on the market for so long. It's a gorgeous Victorian in a great neighborhood. Maybe all these stories are just urban legends that have gotten out of hand." "David, you saw that photograph. You heard what Janet said about the lights, about the furniture that reappears. That's not urban legend, that's something actively happening. But what if there's a rational explanation? What if someone has been secretly maintaining the property, maybe a relative of the original owners? What if the disappearances were just people getting spooked by ghost stories and leaving town?" Sarah wanted to argue, but part of her was intrigued despite her fear. The house was undeniably beautiful, and she had felt drawn to it from the moment she first saw it. Maybe David was right. Maybe the rational explanation was simply that the house had developed a reputation that scared people away from what was actually a wonderful property. "Let's sleep on it," she said. But sleep didn't come easily. Around midnight, Sarah found herself back at the kitchen window, looking toward the end of the street. The house was dark, its windows reflecting the streetlights like closed eyes. As she watched, one of the upstairs windows began to glow with a soft, warm light. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, the entire house was illuminated, and she could see the familiar shadows moving from room to room. But tonight, something was different. One of the figures, a woman in a 1950s dress, appeared at the front window and seemed to be looking directly at Sarah. The woman raised her hand and waved. Sarah stumbled backward from the window, her heart racing. When she looked again, the lights were gone and the house had returned to darkness. The next morning, David found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the real estate agent's business card. "I want to make an offer," she said. "Sarah, what changed your mind?" She couldn't tell him about the woman waving from the window. Instead, she said, "You're right. We could be passing up the opportunity of a lifetime because of ghost stories." David looked concerned. "Are you sure? Yesterday you seemed convinced something was wrong with that place." "I still think something strange is happening there, but maybe that's exactly why we need to buy it. Maybe the house needs someone who won't run away at the first sign of something unusual." 3 weeks later, they were signing closing papers in Janet Morrison's office. The real estate agent had tried to talk them out of the purchase repeatedly, even going so far as to show them other properties she thought might interest them more. But Sarah and David were determined. The final sale price was absurdly low, less than half of what a comparable property would cost anywhere else in the neighborhood. Janet had also insisted on some unusual contract clauses, including a 30-day return policy and a waiver absolving her of responsibility for anything that might happen after the sale. "I want you to promise me something," Janet said as she handed over the keys. "If things start feeling wrong, and you'll know what I mean when it happens, don't try to stick it out. Don't think you can handle it or wait for it to get better. Just leave." "We promise," David said, though Sarah could hear the skepticism in his voice. They moved in on a Saturday in early October. The first few days were blissfully normal. Sarah spent her time getting familiar with the house's layout and planning how to arrange their belongings among the existing furniture. David focused on practical matters, checking the electrical system, testing the plumbing, examining the foundation for any obvious problems. Everything was in perfect working order. Their first week in the house passed without incident. Sarah began to feel foolish for ever being frightened of the place. Yes, it was old and full of history, but it was also beautiful and well-maintained. The gardens practically took care of themselves. The hardwood floors needed no refinishing, and the vintage furniture gave every room a character that would have cost a fortune to recreate. Max seemed to adjust well, too. After his initial reluctance to approach the house, he now bounded eagerly up the front steps each time they returned from walks. He had claimed the living room as his territory and spent hours napping in a patch of sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. It was during their second week that Sarah first heard the children. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the sound of laughter from the backyard. Looking out the window, she expected to see neighborhood kids who had wandered into their yard, but the space was empty. The laughter continued for several minutes, the joyful sounds of children at play, before gradually fading away. That night, she mentioned it to David, who suggested it was probably sounds carrying from nearby yards. The acoustics of old houses could be strange, he said, making distant noises seem closer than they actually were. But the next afternoon, Sarah heard the children again. This time she was in the living room, and the sounds seemed to be coming. From upstairs, running footsteps, muffled giggles, the sound of doors opening and closing. She climbed the stairs to investigate, but found all the bedrooms empty and undisturbed. On Thursday evening, David was working late again, leaving Sarah alone in the house for the first time since they'd moved in. She had been looking forward to a quiet evening with a book and a glass of wine, but as darkness fell, the house began to feel different around her. It started with small sounds, creaking floorboards in rooms she wasn't in, the whisper of curtains moving in windows she was certain she had left closed. Then she heard the front door open and close, followed by footsteps in the foyer. "David?" she called, thinking he had come home early. No response. She went to the front door, but it was locked, with no sign that anyone had entered. The foyer was empty, but she could smell something that hadn't been there before. The scent of pipe tobacco and a woman's perfume, old-fashioned and sweet. Sarah returned to the living room, trying to convince herself that old houses simply made strange noises. But over the next hour, the sounds intensified. She heard conversations in distant rooms, a man's voice, a woman's voice, children calling to each other. She heard footsteps on the stairs, doors opening and closing, the sound of running water in bathrooms she wasn't using. By the time David came home at 10 o'clock, Sarah was sitting in the living room with all the lights on, Max pressed against her side. "How was your evening?" he asked, giving her a kiss. "Fine," she lied. Quiet. But that night, she lay awake, listening to the house around them. Even with David sleeping peacefully beside her, she could hear the soft sounds of a family going about their nighttime routines. Parents checking on children, footsteps in the hallway, the distant murmur of conversation. The next morning, she found evidence that she hadn't imagined at all. In the kitchen, the table was set for 5 again, despite the fact that she had cleared it the night before. Upstairs, toys that had been neatly arranged in the children's bedrooms were scattered across the floors as if they had been recently played with. "David," she said when he came down for breakfast, "we need to talk." She told him everything. The sounds, the smells, the evidence of activity they hadn't caused. David listened patiently, but she could see the concern growing in his eyes. "Honey, are you feeling all right? You've seemed tense lately." I'm not having a breakdown if that's what you're thinking. Something is happening in this house. Okay, let's say you're right. What exactly do you think is happening? Sarah took a deep breath. I think the Blackwood family is still here. I think they never left. David was quiet for a long moment. That's impossible. Is it? We don't know what happened to them. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe they became part of the house somehow. Sarah, listen to yourself. You're talking about ghosts. I'm talking about something I can't explain, but that I know is real. That evening, David made a point of staying home, determined to help Sarah figure out what was really happening. They had dinner together, watched television, went through their normal evening routine. Everything seemed perfectly normal until they went to bed. Around 2 a.m, David woke Sarah by shaking her shoulder. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. She listened. From somewhere in the house came the sound of a piano being played, a gentle melody, like a lullaby. The music was soft but clear, floating up through the floorboards from the living room below. They crept downstairs together, Max following nervously behind them. The living room was empty, but the piano bench was pulled out as if someone had just been sitting there. The sheet music on the piano stand was open to a piece neither of them recognized, a handwritten composition titled, "Good Night, My Darlings." David examined the piano carefully. This is impossible. There's no mechanism for it to play itself. It's not electric, there's no player piano attachment. As if in response to his words, the piano began to play again. The keys moved by themselves, pressing down in the gentle rhythm of the lullaby. Sarah and David stood frozen, watching invisible fingers dance across the keyboard. The music continued for several minutes, then gradually faded to silence. In the quiet that followed, they heard a woman's voice, soft and distant, singing words to the melody. "Sleep, my darlings, sleep so deep. In this house your souls I'll keep. Safe from harm and safe from fear, Mama's love will hold you near." The voice faded, leaving them standing in their living room staring at a piano that had just played itself. "We're leaving," David said quietly. "No," Sarah surprised herself by saying. "We're not." "Sarah, a piano just played itself." We heard a disembodied voice singing a lullaby. "This is not normal. I know it's not normal, but I don't think it's threatening us. I think they're trying to communicate with us. They're dead, Sarah. If they're here at all, they're dead." "Maybe. But they were a family once. They had children, they loved each other. They lived in this house, and were happy here. If they're still here somehow, maybe they just want to be acknowledged." David stared at her. "You want to stay in a haunted house?" "I want to stay in our house, our home. I want to find out what they need from us." The next few days established a pattern. During the daylight hours, the house felt normal, comfortable, lived in. Sarah and David went about their routines, and apart from the occasional sound of children playing in empty rooms, they could almost pretend nothing unusual was happening. But at night, the house came alive with the presence of the Blackwood family. They would hear Mr. Blackwood coming home from work, his footsteps heavy on the front porch. They would hear Mrs. Blackwood preparing dinner, humming to herself in the kitchen. They would hear the children running through the hallways, playing games, calling for their parents. Sometimes Sarah would find evidence of their activities in the morning. Toys moved in the children's rooms, the scent of cooking food lingering in the kitchen, the impression of bodies in chairs that had been empty when she went to bed. But gradually, she began to notice that the activities were following a pattern. The family seemed to be reliving the same routines over and over, the same evening schedule, the same interactions, the same bedtime ritual with the piano lullaby. It was as if they were trapped in a loop, repeating their final days endlessly. One evening, Sarah decided to try something. As the sounds of the family's dinner routine began in the kitchen, she went downstairs and stood in the doorway. "Mrs. Blackwood?" she said quietly. The sound stopped immediately. "Mrs. Blackwood, my name is Sarah. My husband and I live in your house now. We know you're here and we're not afraid of you." The silence stretched for several minutes. Then slowly the sounds resumed, but different this time. Instead of the usual dinner preparation, she heard the sound of a chair being pulled out from the table. Sarah understood the invitation. She sat down at the kitchen table, in the chair that had been prepared for her. For the next hour she sat there while the sounds of family life continued around her. She heard Mrs. Blackwood moving around the kitchen, cooking and cleaning. She heard the children playing in the next room. She heard Mr. Blackwood reading aloud from what sounded like a newspaper. But gradually she began to understand that she wasn't just listening to sounds. She was experiencing memories. The Blackwood family's final evening was playing out around her, and somehow she was being allowed to witness it. She saw Mrs. Blackwood, not clearly, more like a double exposure, but definitely there, moving between the stove and the counter, preparing what looked like a roast dinner. She was a pretty woman in her 30s with dark hair pinned back and a floral dress that fit the 1950s perfectly. She saw the children too, 2 boys and a girl, ages ranging from about 6 to 12. They were setting the table, helping with dinner preparations, normal children doing normal evening tasks, and she saw Mr. Blackwood, tall and thin, reading his newspaper in the living room while occasionally calling out comments to his wife about the day's events. It was a perfectly ordinary family evening, the kind of scene that had played out in millions of homes across America in the 1950s. But as Sarah watched, she began to sense an underlying tension, a feeling that something was wrong despite the family's normal activities. Mrs. Blackwood kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting someone. The children seemed more subdued than usual, clustering closer to their parents, and Mr. Blackwood, despite his casual newspaper reading, kept checking his watch and looking toward the front door. As the evening progressed, the tension intensified. Sarah heard Mr. Blackwood speaking in low, urgent tones to his wife. She caught fragments of conversation, something about leaving, about it not being safe to stay, about having to go tonight. The children were sent upstairs early, but Sarah could hear them whispering in their rooms, aware that something unusual was happening. Mrs. Blackwood began packing, moving quickly and quietly through the house, gathering belongings, and then, around 10 o'clock, someone knocked on the front door. The family froze. Mr. Blackwood motioned for everyone to be quiet, but the knocking continued, not aggressive but persistent and somehow wrong, as if the person outside knew they were being ignored. Sarah watched in growing horror as, "They said my childhood friend died. He visited me last week." The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. I remember the exact time because I'd been lying awake, watching the red digits on my alarm clock blur and sharpen as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. Sleep had been elusive lately, slipping away whenever I tried to grasp it, leaving me suspended in that liminal space between consciousness and dreams. "Marcus?" The voice was unfamiliar, strained. "This is Detective Reynolds with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm calling about Daniel Hoffman. You're listed as his emergency contact." Daniel, my childhood friend, the boy who'd spent countless summer afternoons building forts in my backyard, who'd taught me how to catch fireflies in mason jars, who'd shared his deepest fears about the monster he swore lived in his bedroom closet. We'd drifted apart after high school, as friends do, but we'd kept in touch sporadically through social media and the occasional text message. "What's wrong?" I asked. though something cold was already settling in my stomach. Sir, I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Hoffman was found deceased in his apartment this evening. Apparent suicide. We'll need someone to identify the body and handle his effects. According to his records, he has no living family. The words hit me like a physical blow. Daniel dead. The boy who'd once promised we'd be friends forever, who'd sworn blood oaths of loyalty with me when we were 10 years old, cutting our palms, with his father's penknife and pressing our wounds together under the pale glow of a flashlight. I heard myself agreeing to come to Portland, making arrangements, speaking in the hollow voice of someone going through the motions. But inside I was reeling. Daniel had seemed fine the last time we'd talked, maybe 6 months ago. He'd gotten a job at a tech startup, was dating someone new, had even mentioned maybe visiting me here in Seattle. The drive to Portland felt endless. I kept replaying our last conversation, searching for signs I'd missed, clues that might have warned me. But there was nothing. Daniel had sounded tired, maybe a little stressed about work, but not suicidal, not like someone who was planning to end his life. The morgue was exactly as grim as I'd expected. Detective Reynolds was a kind man with weary eyes who walked me through the process with professional compassion. When they pulled back the sheet, I barely recognized the pale, still face beneath it. This wasn't the Daniel I remembered, the boy with the crooked smile and mischievous green eyes. This was a stranger wearing his features. "It's him," I whispered, though part of me wanted to deny it, to claim they'd made a mistake. The detective explained that Daniel had been found hanging in his apartment closet. No note, no obvious signs of struggle. His neighbors had called in a welfare check when they noticed his mail piling up and his car hadn't moved in days. The timeline suggested he'd been dead for almost a week. Was he having problems? Financial trouble, relationship issues? Reynolds asked gently. I shook my head. Not that I know of. We weren't as close as we used to be, but he never mentioned anything serious. This doesn't make sense. But suicide rarely does, the detective explained. Sometimes people hide their pain so well that even those closest to them never see it coming. I handled the arrangements. Daniel's apartment, his few possessions, the funeral. It was a small service, attended by a handful of co-workers and neighbors who barely knew him. I stood at the graveside and watched them lower the casket into the ground, feeling like I was burying the last remnant of my childhood. The drive back to Seattle was a blur of rain and highway lights. I kept thinking about Daniel's apartment, how empty it had felt, how few personal items he'd accumulated. There were no photos of friends or family, no mementos from our childhood, nothing that suggested he'd ever had a life beyond those sterile walls. It was as if he'd been systematically erasing himself for years. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face on the morgue table, pale and peaceful in a way that made my skin crawl. I kept getting up to check my phone, half expecting to see a text from him, some explanation for this cosmic joke. But the screen remained dark and silent. 3 days later, I was finally drifting off when I heard the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from my bedroom window, a rhythmic sound like fingernails on glass. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked toward the window. The blinds were drawn, but I could see a shadow moving behind them, the silhouette of someone standing on my fire escape. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. The tapping stopped. Then so faintly I almost missed it, I heard my name. Marcus. I knew that voice. I'd known it for over 20 years, had heard it laugh and cry and whisper secrets in the dark. But it couldn't be. Daniel was dead. I'd seen his body, watched them put him in the ground. Marcus let me in. My hands shook as I reached for the blinds. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to call the police, to run, to do anything but look. But I had to know. I had to see. I pulled the cord, and the blind snapped up. Daniel was standing on my fire escape just as he had countless times when we were kids. He looked exactly as I remembered him from high school. Young, healthy, wearing the same crooked smile that had gotten us both into trouble more times than I could count. But his eyes were different. They were too bright, too knowing, and they held depths that made my stomach churn. "Hey, Marcus," he said through the glass. "Long time no see." I stumbled backward, my legs giving out. This wasn't possible. This was a hallucination, a breakdown brought on by grief and guilt. People didn't just come back from the dead. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel laughed, and the sound was like ice water in my veins. "Come on, let me in. We need to talk." "You're dead." The words came out as a whisper. "I saw you. I identified your body." "Did you?" Daniel pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging the window. "Are you sure about that?" I wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. But something in his voice held me frozen. A doubt, creeping in like cold water through cracks in a dam. "The morgue," I said. "Detective Reynolds, you were hanging in your closet." "Was I?" Daniel's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Or was that just what you wanted to see?" My mind reeled. I remembered the morgue, the detective, the pale face under the sheet. But now, looking at Daniel's very much alive face through my window, the memories felt fuzzy around the edges, like a dream half remembered upon waking. "Let me in, Marcus. We have so much to catch up on." Against every instinct, I found myself moving toward the window. My hand reached for the lock, trembling as I turned it. The window slid open, and Daniel stepped inside with fluid grace. He looked around my bedroom with casual interest, as if he'd just dropped by for a visit. "Nice place, very you." He picked up a photo from my nightstand. Me and my girlfriend Sarah at the beach last summer. "Still with the same girl?" "She's pretty." "Daniel, how are you here? I don't understand." He set the photo down and turned to face me. Up close, I could see that something was wrong with his skin. It had a waxy, artificial quality like a mannequin's face. And his eyes, God, his eyes were like looking into deep water at night. "Sit down, Marcus. This might take a while." I perched on the edge of my bed, my legs too weak to support me. Daniel settled into my desk chair, spinning it around to face me with the same casual ease he'd shown as a child. "Do you remember," he began, "when we were kids, and I used to tell you about the thing in my closet?" I nodded. How could I forget? Daniel had been convinced that something lived in his childhood bedroom closet, something that watched him sleep and whispered his name in the dark. I'd laughed it off the way kids do, but Daniel had been genuinely terrified. "You thought I was making it up," Daniel continued. "You thought it was just nightmares and overactive imagination, but I knew it was real. I could feel it watching me, waiting for the right moment." "Daniel, that was just... was it?" His voice was sharp now, cutting. "Because that thing is still there, Marcus. Still waiting. Still hungry." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "I don't understand. You're talking about childhood fears, but you're supposed to be dead. I saw your body." Daniel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Did you? Or did you see what it wanted you to see?" The room felt like it was spinning. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to focus, trying to make sense of this impossible situation. "This isn't real. You're not real." "I'm as real as I've ever been," Daniel said. "The question is, are you?" I looked up at him, and for a moment his face flickered like a television with bad reception. For just an instant, I saw something else. Something with too many teeth and eyes like black holes, before Daniel's familiar features reasserted themselves. "What are you?" I whispered. "I'm your friend," he said simply. "I've always been your friend. Even when I was trapped in that closet, even when I was hanging from a rope, even when I was rotting in the ground. I've been waiting for you to understand." "Understand what?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "That none of this is real, Marcus. None of it has ever been real." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the world tilt, reality shifting beneath my feet like quicksand. "The phone call," I said slowly. "The detective, the morgue, the funeral. All of it." Daniel nodded. "Every single bit of it. A story you've been telling yourself to make sense of what you can't understand. But I remember, you remember what you need to remember, what makes the story work. But deep down you know the truth." I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The Seattle skyline glittered in the distance, normal and familiar and real. But even as I looked at it, I could feel doubt creeping in. How long had I been standing here? How long had Daniel been talking? "I went to Portland," I said desperately. "I drove there. I saw his apartment." "Did you?" Daniel was behind me now, his voice a whisper in my ear. "Or did you dream it?" I spun around, but he was still sitting in the chair, watching me with those terrible, knowing eyes. "I'm going crazy," I said. "This is a breakdown. I'm hallucinating." "Are you?" Daniel smiled. "Or are you finally waking up?" The room began to blur around the edges. The walls seemed to stretch and warp, and I could hear something, a low, rhythmic sound like breathing, or like the creak of a rope under weight. "Where am I?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "You're in your bedroom," Daniel said. "You've been in your bedroom for a very long time. Sleeping. Sleeping. The deepest sleep." He nodded. "The kind you don't wake up from. The kind where you dream entire lives, entire realities, just to avoid looking at the truth." I looked around the room again, and this time I noticed things I'd missed before. The dust thick on every surface. The stale smell of air that hadn't been circulated in weeks. The way the light from the window seemed wrong, too bright and too dim at the same time. "How long?" I whispered. "Does it matter?" Daniel stood up, moving toward me with that fluid, inhuman grace. "Time doesn't work the way you think it does when you're dreaming. You could have been here for days, weeks, months. You could have been here forever." "But why? Why would I dream about you dying?" "Because," Daniel said, and now his voice was coming from everywhere at once. "It's easier than remembering what really happened." The room began to spin faster. I felt myself falling, but I never hit the ground. Instead, I was floating in darkness with Daniel's voice echoing around me. "Do you remember the last time you saw me, Marcus? Really saw me?" Images flashed through my mind like a broken film reel. Daniel at 18, eyes wild with fear, talking about the thing in his closet. Daniel begging me to stay the night, to keep him company. Daniel's parents going out of town, leaving us alone in that big, empty house. "I remember," I said, though I didn't want to. "Tell me." Daniel's voice was soft now, almost gentle. "You called me," I said slowly. "You said it was getting stronger, that it was almost ready to come out of the closet. You begged me to come over. And what did you do?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. I laughed. "I told you to grow up. I said I was too old for your stupid games. And then I hung up on you." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "I hung up on you and I never called back. And the next day?" "The next day?" I could see it now, clear as crystal. The next day, your parents found you in your bedroom, but not in the closet. In your bed, like you'd just gone to sleep and never woken up. No note, Daniel said. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause of death. Just a young man who seemed to have simply stopped. The doctors said it was a heart defect, something that had gone undiagnosed, a 1 in a million chance. But you knew better, didn't you? I did. I'd known from the moment I heard the news. Daniel hadn't died of a heart defect, he died of fear. He died alone in that dark room, waiting for something to emerge from his closet, and I hadn't been there to help him. I killed you, I whispered. No, Daniel said. And suddenly he was in front of me again, solid and real. You just weren't there to save me. And you've been punishing yourself for it ever since. By dreaming about your suicide. By dreaming about scenarios where you could have helped. Where you could have been the hero. The caring friend who identified the body. Who handled the arrangements, who mourned properly. All the things you wished you'd done in real life. The darkness around us began to take shape. I could see the outline of a bedroom, not mine, but Daniel's childhood room. The bed where he died. The closet where he'd been so sure something was waiting. I've been asleep, I said, understanding finally dawning. For weeks, Daniel nodded. Ever since you heard about my death, you came home, went to bed, and just never got up. Your girlfriend is worried sick. She's been bringing you food, checking on you, begging you to wake up. But you can't hear her. You're too deep in the dream. Why are you here? Why are you telling me this? Daniel smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuinely sad. Because I'm your friend, Marcus. I always have been. Even dead, I'm still your friend. And friends don't let friends sleep their lives away. I could feel myself starting to wake up, a strange, floating sensation like rising from deep water. But I fought it, clinging to the dream. I don't want to face it, I said. I don't want to live with knowing that I failed you. You didn't fail me, Daniel said gently. You were 18 years old. You thought I was being dramatic. You couldn't have known what would happen. But if you just what? Stayed the night? Talked to me? Maybe. Or maybe the same thing would have happened anyway. Maybe nothing could have saved me from what was waiting in that closet. What was waiting in the closet, Daniel? What was the thing you were so afraid of? Daniel's expression grew serious. Death, Marcus. I was afraid of death, and death was afraid of me. We were locked in this dance, this game of cat and mouse, and eventually it won. But that doesn't mean it was your fault. The bedroom around us began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. I could feel the real world pulling at me, tugging me back toward consciousness. I have to go, Daniel said. And so do you. Will I see you again? Not like this, he said. But you'll carry me with you. The real me, not the guilt-ridden version you've been torturing yourself with. The friend who taught you to catch fireflies. The boy who shared his deepest fears with you. The person who loved you enough to forgive you for being human. I felt tears on my cheeks. Real tears, I realized. Not dream tears. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I know, he said. And I forgive you, now forgive yourself. The dream shattered like glass, and I was falling through layers of sleep, through weeks of unconsciousness back toward the waking world. The last thing I heard was Daniel's voice fading like an echo. Wake up, Marcus. Wake up and live. I opened, my eyes to bright afternoon sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. My mouth was dry as dust, my body ached from lying in one position for too long, and I could hear Sarah's voice in the living room talking on the phone. I don't know what else to do, she was saying. He won't wake up. He barely eats. It's like He's in a coma, but the doctors say there's nothing wrong with him physically. I tried to sit up, my muscles protesting after weeks of disuse. Sarah? My voice came out as a croak. I heard the phone clatter to the floor, and then she was running toward the bedroom. She appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Marcus? Oh my God, Marcus, you're awake. She rushed to me, pulling me into a fierce hug. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. Real, solid, alive. How long? I asked. 3 weeks, she said, pulling back to look at me. 3 weeks since you got that phone call about Daniel. You came home, went to bed, and just wouldn't wake up. I've been so scared. I looked toward the window, half expecting to see Daniel standing on the fire escape. But there was nothing there except the Seattle skyline, normal and familiar and wonderfully, beautifully real. I'm sorry, I said to Sarah, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. I'm so sorry I left you alone. Don't apologize, she said, brushing tears from her eyes. Just don't do it again. I thought I'd lost you. Over the next few days, I slowly returned to the land of the living. I called in sick to work, explaining as much as I could without sounding insane. I ate real food, took real showers, had real conversations with real people. But at night, when I was alone with my thoughts, I found myself thinking about Daniel. Not the Daniel from my dreams, the one who had died by suicide and come back to visit me. The real Daniel, the boy who had been so afraid of something in his closet that he died of terror at 18 years old. The friend I'd failed when he needed me most. I started going to therapy, talking about the guilt I'd carried for over a decade. Dr. Morrison was a kind woman who listened without judgment as I worked through my feelings about Daniel's death. She helped me understand that survivor's guilt was normal, that I couldn't have prevented something I didn't know was coming, but the healing didn't happen overnight. Some nights I would lie awake and remember the dream so vividly that I wondered if it had been real. I would check my phone for evidence of the Portland trip, search for Detective Reynolds online, look for proof that I'd imagined the whole thing, but there was nothing. No plane tickets, no hotel receipts, no record of any interaction with the Portland Police Bureau. Daniel had died at 18, alone in his childhood bedroom, and I had spent the last 12 years constructing elaborate fantasies about how I could have saved him or at least honored his memory properly. The suicide story, the detective's phone call, the funeral, all of it had been my mind's way of giving me a second chance, a way to be the friend I wished I'd been. 3 months after I woke up, I decided to visit Daniel's grave. Not the imaginary one from my dream, but the real one in the cemetery back in our hometown. I drove there on a Saturday morning, armed with flowers and a letter I'd written but would never send. The headstone was simple. Daniel Hoffman, 1985-2003, beloved son. No mention of the fear that had consumed his final years, no hint of the terror that had ultimately killed him. Just a young man who had died too soon. I sat beside the grave for a long time, talking to Daniel as if he could hear me. I told him about the dream, about the guilt I'd carried, about the 3 weeks I'd spent sleeping my life away. I apologized for not being there, for not taking his fears seriously, for failing him when he needed me most. As I was getting ready to leave, I noticed something strange. There was a small pile of stones on Daniel's grave. Not decorative stones, but the kind kids would collect from a playground or a creek bed. They looked like the kind of stones Daniel and I used to skip across the pond behind his house when we were young. I bent down to examine them more closely. They couldn't have been there long. There was no moss or weathering on them, and they were arranged in a deliberate pattern. As I looked closer, I realized they formed a rough circle, like the kind we used to make when we were playing games in his backyard. A chill ran down my spine. I looked around the cemetery, but there was no one else in sight. No children playing, no other mourners, no groundskeepers, just me and the stones and the silence. I reached out to touch one of the stones, and as my finger made contact, I could have sworn I heard something, a whisper, so faint it might have been the wind. But it sounded like a voice I knew, saying words that made my heart race. "Thank you for waking up." I jerked my hand back, staring at the stones. They were just stones. Ordinary, everyday stones. That could have been placed there by anyone. A child playing in the cemetery. Another visitor paying respects. A groundskeeper with too much time on his hands. But as I walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. Whether it was my imagination, a coincidence, or something more, I chose to believe it was Daniel's way of letting me know that he was at peace, that he forgave me, that he was ready for me to forgive myself. I drove home to Sarah, to my real life, to the waking world with all its messy, complicated, beautiful reality. I never had another dream about Daniel visiting me. I never again fell into that deep, unnatural sleep that had nearly claimed me. But sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm lying in bed beside Sarah, I think about my friend who was so afraid of the dark that it killed him. I think about the thing he believed was waiting in his closet, and I wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was right to be afraid. Because sometimes the monsters are real. Sometimes the things that go bump in the night are exactly what we think they are. And sometimes when someone we love tells us they're scared, the kindest thing we can do is simply believe them. I learned that lesson too late to save Daniel, but I carry it with me now, a reminder that our fears, rational or not, are real to us. That dismissing someone's terror, even if it seems childish or unfounded, can have consequences we never imagined. Daniel died at 18, alone and afraid. But in my dreams, he lived long enough to teach me one final lesson, that the deepest sleep is the one we choose when we can't face the truth, and that sometimes it takes a friend, even a dead one, to wake us up. I still miss him. I probably always will. But I'm no longer sleeping my life away in penance for failing him. I'm awake and I'm living, and I'm trying to be the kind of friend who listens when someone says they're scared. Because you never know when that fear might be the last thing they ever share with you. And you never know when the thing in the closet might actually be real. I got a job doing surveillance, but I was being watched. The job posting was too good to be true. That should have been my first warning. Night surveillance operator needed. 85-hour, remote work, flexible schedule. No experience necessary. Serious inquiries only. $85 an hour for watching security cameras from home. I'd been unemployed for 3 months, burning through my savings and dodging calls from my landlord. My computer science degree felt worthless when every entry-level position wanted 5 years of experience. So when I saw that posting on a sketchy freelance website at 2 a.m., desperation overrode my better judgment. I submitted my application immediately, not even bothering to research the company. The response came within an hour. "Congratulations, you've been selected for the position. Training begins tonight. Equipment will be delivered tomorrow. Please confirm your address and availability for a 6 p.m. start time." The email came from Nightwatch Security Solutions, a company I'd never heard of. Their website was bare bones, just a black background with white text claiming they provided premium surveillance services for discerning clients. No photos, no testimonials, no real information about what they actually did. But $85 an hour was $85 an hour. The equipment arrived the next afternoon in unmarked boxes. 3 high-end monitors, a computer tower, that hummed with expensive-sounding fans and a headset that looked like something from a NASA mission. The setup instructions were detailed but strange, requiring me to position the monitors at specific angles and install blackout curtains over my windows to eliminate glare and maintain operational security. At exactly 6 p.m., my phone rang. David Chen? The voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. Yes, that's me. This is Marcus Webb from Nightwatch. I'll be handling your training tonight. Are you ready to begin? Absolutely. Excellent. First, let me explain your role. You'll be monitoring multiple surveillance feeds simultaneously. Your job is to watch for anomalies, anything unusual, out of place, or potentially threatening. When you spot something, you log it in the system with a timestamp and description. Simple enough? It sounded almost too simple. What kind of anomalies should I be looking for? That's something you'll learn to recognize with experience. For now, just document anything that strikes you as odd. The system will guide you through the reporting process. The computer powered up and my screens filled with a grid of camera feeds. At first glance, they looked like typical security footage. Empty office buildings, parking garages, residential hallways. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something unsettling about the quality. The images were too clear, too detailed. I could make out individual dust motes floating in the air, red text on papers left on distant desks, see the grain in wooden surfaces that should have been mere pixels at this resolution. These are incredibly high-definition cameras, I said. We use state-of-the-art equipment, Marcus replied. Our clients expect the best. Now let's begin with your first assignment. You'll be monitoring feeds from a residential complex in Portland. 12 units, 43 cameras total. Your shift is 8 hours. Remember to document everything unusual. The feeds showed the interior of apartment buildings, hallways, stairwells, laundry rooms, and what appeared to be individual apartments. I could see people going about their daily lives unaware they were being watched. A woman in 3B was cooking dinner. A man in 7A was watching television in his underwear. A couple in 1C was having what looked like a heated argument. Marcus, I said, uncomfortable with what I was seeing. These look like private residences. Do the tenants know they're being recorded? There was a brief pause. All surveillance is conducted within legal parameters, David. Your job is to observe and report, not to question the ethics of our operations. Focus on the task at hand. The tone in his voice made it clear that further questions wouldn't be welcome. I needed this job, so I swallowed my concerns and began watching. The first few hours were mind-numbingly boring. People ate dinner, watched TV, did laundry, went to bed. I dutifully logged the timestamp whenever someone entered or left a room, when lights went on or off, when anyone did anything that could potentially be considered noteworthy. The system seemed to accept any input, no matter how mundane. It was around 10 p.m. when I noticed something odd in one of the feeds. A man in apartment 5D was standing perfectly still in his living room facing the camera. He'd been in that exact position for over an hour, not moving a muscle. At first I thought the feed had frozen, but I could see dust particles moving in the air around him. I logged it as subject in 5D motionless for extended period and moved on. An hour later, the man was still there. Same position, same expression, staring directly at the camera with unblinking eyes. I checked the timestamp. He'd been standing there for 2 hours and 17 minutes. I called Marcus. There's something wrong with one of the subjects, I said. The man in 5D has been standing motionless for over 2 hours. Should I be concerned? Interesting, Marcus said. What's his posture like? His expression? He's just standing there, looking at the camera. It's like he knows he's being watched. Log it and continue monitoring. Sometimes subjects exhibit unusual behavior. It's why we watch them. But shouldn't someone check on him? What if he's having a medical emergency? David, your job is to observe and report, nothing more. Continue with your shift. The line went dead. I stared at the man in 5D, and I swear he stared back. It was impossible. The camera was hidden. There was no way he could know exactly where it was positioned. But his gaze seemed to look directly into my eyes through the screen. At exactly midnight, he moved. One step backward, then another, until he disappeared into the shadows at the edge of the camera's range. I never saw him again that night. The rest of my shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this job. When my 8 hours ended at 2 a.m., I was exhausted in a way that felt unnatural, as if the act of watching had drained something vital from me. I slept poorly that day, plagued by dreams of being watched by invisible eyes. When I woke up, I considered quitting, but then I checked my bank account and saw that $680 had been deposited overnight. No delays, no processing time. The money was just there, exactly as promised. $85 an hour was $85 an hour. The second night, I was assigned to a different location, an office building in Chicago. The feeds showed empty cubicles, conference rooms, and executive offices after hours. This seemed more normal, more like traditional security work. I began to relax. That's when I noticed the timestamps were wrong. According to my computer, it was 7:30 p.m. on the West Coast, but the timestamp on the Chicago feeds showed 3:30 a.m. local time. The building should have been empty at that hour, but I could see lights turning on and off in offices, elevator doors opening and closing, coffee makers brewing fresh pots. I called Marcus to report the discrepancy. "The timestamps are incorrect," I said. "Either my system is wrong or these feeds aren't live." "The feeds are live, David. Perhaps you're experiencing some technical difficulties. Have you been getting enough sleep?" The question was oddly personal. "I sleep during the day. My schedule's a bit backwards now, but I'm managing." "How many hours of sleep did you get today?" "Maybe 4 or 5. Why does that matter?" "Sleep deprivation can cause perception issues, hallucinations, time distortion, paranoid thoughts. Perhaps you should rest more between shifts." "I'm not hallucinating," I said firmly. "The timestamps clearly show." "David, I need you to focus on your assigned tasks. Document anomalies in subject behavior, not technical glitches. Can you do that for me?" Once again, the tone made it clear that arguing would be pointless. I hung up and returned to the screens, but now I was paying attention to details I'd missed before. In one office, a man was working at his computer at 3:30 a.m., which was strange enough. But when I looked closer, I realized he was typing on a keyboard that wasn't connected to anything. In another office, a woman was having an animated phone conversation, but there was no phone visible anywhere near her. I logged both incidents as anomalies and kept watching. Around midnight, or 6 a.m. Chicago time according to the feeds, I noticed movement in one of the executive offices. A figure was standing at the window looking out at the city below. The camera angle made it difficult to see clearly, but something about the person's posture seemed wrong. Their arms were too long, hanging past their knees. Their head was tilted at an unnatural angle. I zoomed in as much as the system would allow, but the image became pixelated and distorted. All I could make out was a tall, impossibly thin silhouette against the bright city lights. The figure turned toward the camera, and for just a moment I saw its face, or what should have been its face. Instead, there was just smooth skin where features should have been, broken only by 2 dark holes that might have been eyes. I stumbled backward from my desk, knocking over my coffee. When I looked back at the screen, the office was empty. I didn't log that one. By my 4th night, I was starting to understand the true nature of my job. The surveillance wasn't about security. It was about cataloging something else entirely. The people in these feeds weren't living normal lives. They were performing some kind of elaborate pantomime, going through the motions of human behavior, while something watched and recorded every detail. And I was part of that system now, another watcher in an endless chain of observation. The feeds that night showed a suburban house, a normal-looking family home with a white picket fence and a well-maintained garden. But the cameras were everywhere, not just in common areas, but in bedrooms, bathrooms, even inside closets and cabinets. Every inch of the house was under surveillance. The family living there seemed oblivious to the cameras. A mother, father, and 2 young children went about their evening routine: dinner, homework, bath time, bedtime stories. It would have been touching if not for the pervasive sense that something was fundamentally wrong. The children's movements were too precise, too choreographed. They never stumbled or hesitated, never acted with the natural clumsiness of kids their age. The parents spoke to each other in stilted sentences, like actors reading from a script they hadn't quite memorized. And throughout the house, in every room, additional figures lurked just outside the camera's range. Shadows that moved, independently of any light source. Glimpses of faces that appeared for a split second before vanishing. Hands reaching out from behind furniture before quickly withdrawing. I was logging these observations when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. In the feed showing the children's bedroom, both kids were asleep in their beds. But there was a third small figure standing in the corner, perfectly still, watching them sleep. It looked like a child, but wrong in every conceivable way. Too tall and too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its head was oversized, and even in the grainy night vision feed, I could see that its eyes were completely white. As I watched, it began to move closer to the sleeping children, step by step, with movements that were too fluid, too graceful. It reached the first bed and extended one unnaturally long arm toward the child's face. I grabbed my phone to call Marcus, but before I could dial, my computer screen went black. All 3 monitors shut off simultaneously, leaving me sitting in total darkness. The screens flickered back to life a moment later, showing the same bedroom. The children were still asleep. The figure in the corner was gone. According to the timestamp, no time had passed at all, but I knew what I'd seen. I called Marcus anyway. There was something in the children's room, I said without preamble. Something that wasn't human. It was approaching the kids while they slept, and then the system shut down. David, you sound stressed. How much sleep have you been getting? This isn't about sleep deprivation. I saw something that shouldn't exist, and then the system conveniently malfunctioned at the exact moment it would have been most clear. Our equipment is extremely reliable. If there was a momentary glitch, it was likely due to environmental factors. Perhaps a power fluctuation in the area. What kind of company is Nightwatch, Marcus? What are we really doing here? There was a long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed. It was still professional, but there was an undertone of something I couldn't identify. Amusement? Satisfaction? We're expanding human understanding, David. We're documenting phenomena that most people aren't prepared to acknowledge. You've been selected for this work because you have the right temperament for it. What does that mean? It means you see things that others might dismiss. You pay attention to details that matter. You're naturally observant, naturally suspicious. These are valuable traits in our line of work. But what is your line of work? What are these feeds really showing me? They're showing you the truth, David. The reality that exists just beneath the surface of what most people perceive as normal life. You're privileged to witness it. The way he said privileged made my skin crawl. I want to quit. I'm afraid that's not possible. You've signed a contract. You've seen things that require your continued discretion. And besides, you're very good at this job. We'd hate to lose you. I never signed any contract. Check your email, David. I think you'll find otherwise. I put him on hold and opened my laptop. There, in my inbox, was an email I'd never seen before, dated 3 days ago. The subject line read, "Employment Contract, Nightwatch Security Solutions." The attachment was a dense legal document filled with non-disclosure agreements, non-compete clauses, and terms of employment that seemed to stretch on forever. At the bottom was my digital signature, clear as day. I didn't remember signing it. I was certain I'd never seen this document before. But there it was, legally binding and apparently legitimate. How did you focus on your work, David? You have 4 more hours left in your shift. The line went dead. I sat staring at the screens, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to just walk away, to disconnect the equipment and pretend this job had never happened. But I needed the money, and apparently I was legally bound to continue. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that walking away might not be an option anyway. Over the following nights, the feeds became increasingly disturbing. I watched empty houses where furniture moved by itself. I observed office buildings where the same people repeated identical actions hour after hour, day after day, like broken automatons. I saw hospitals where the patients never slept and the staff cast shadows that didn't match their bodies. And in every location, there were watchers. Figures that existed just outside the camera's focus, observing the observed. Sometimes they were human-shaped, sometimes not. Always wrong in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at them directly. I began to suspect that whatever was in those feeds could see me too. More than once I caught figures on screen turning to look directly at the camera, directly at me, with expressions of knowing awareness. They knew they were being watched, and they knew who was watching them. But it was during my 7th night on the job that I realized the true horror of my situation. I was monitoring feeds from what appeared to be an apartment complex in Denver when I noticed something familiar about one of the units. The layout was identical to my own apartment. Same floor plan, same furniture placement, same everything. I told myself it was a coincidence. Lots of apartments looked similar, especially in modern complexes. But then I saw the details that couldn't be dismissed. The crack in the wall above, the couch, the specific pattern of water stains on the ceiling, the way the blinds hung slightly crooked on the bedroom window. It was my apartment. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to call Marcus. But before I could dial, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. From the speakers connected to my monitoring equipment came the distinct sound of my ringtone. On the screen, I watched myself sitting at my desk, reaching for my phone. I was watching a live feed of myself watching live feeds. The figure on screen, me, answered the phone. I could hear my own voice coming through the speakers, speaking to Marcus about the familiar-looking apartment. I watched myself gesture at the screens, watched myself grow increasingly agitated as the conversation progressed. But I wasn't on the phone. My phone was still in my hand, silent and dark. The me on screen hung up and turned to look directly at the camera. Our eyes met across impossible dimensions of space and surveillance, and I saw in that other David's expression the same dawning horror that I felt in my own chest. That's when I understood. I wasn't just watching the feeds, I was in them. Somewhere in some other monitoring station, another David Chen was watching me the same way I was watching him. And somewhere else, another David was watching that David. An infinite chain of surveillance, each link observing the next, each observer becoming the observed. The phone in my hand began to ring. Marcus's number appeared on the screen. "Congratulations, David," he said when I answered. "You've reached a new level of understanding." "What have you done to me?" We've given you exactly what you applied for, a job doing surveillance. The fact that you're also being watched is simply the nature of the work. Everything watches something, David. Everything is watched by something else. We've just made the process visible. I want out. There is no out. There's only deeper in. Each night you'll monitor different feeds. Each night you'll see more of the truth. And each night someone will be watching you do it. The cycle continues. This is insane. This is reality. Most people go through their lives unaware of how thoroughly they're observed, how completely their privacy is an illusion. We've simply removed the veil. You can see the watchers now, and they can see you seeing them. Isn't that better than ignorance? I looked at the screen showing my apartment. The other David was standing now, pacing back and forth in front of his monitors. I could see the same terror in his movements that I felt in my own body. How many of me are there? I asked. As many as necessary. Each one watching the next. Each one being watched in turn. It's a beautiful system, really. Perfect surveillance requires perfect redundancy. And if I refuse to continue? Marcus chuckled, a sound like breaking glass. Look at your bank account, David. I pulled up my banking app on my phone. The balance showed negative 3,947. According to the transaction history, I owed Nightwatch, security solutions for equipment rental, training costs, and breach of contract penalties. The debt was accumulating interest at a rate that made my head spin. You see, David, you can't afford to quit. The equipment you're using is quite expensive. The training you received was specialized. The information you've been exposed to is highly confidential. Breaking your contract would result in legal and financial consequences that would ruin your life. This is coercion. It's illegal. Is it? Check the contract again. I think you'll find everything is perfectly legal. We're very careful about these things. I disconnected the call and opened the contract on my laptop. The document had changed. What had originally been a simple employment agreement was now a maze of legal language that seemed to shift and rearrange itself as I read. Clauses appeared and disappeared, terms modified themselves in real time, and my signature appeared at the bottom of pages I was certain hadn't existed before. But buried in the fine print, I found something Marcus hadn't mentioned. A single line, almost hidden in a paragraph about intellectual property rights. Employee acknowledges that continued employment may result in gradual integration with surveillance network infrastructure. Integration. The word sent chills down my spine. I looked back at the screen showing my apartment. The other David was reading something on his laptop, probably the same contract I was looking at. As I watched, his face grew pale. He looked up at his camera, and our eyes met again across the impossible distance between watchers and watched. Then he began to change. It was subtle at first, just a slight elongation of his limbs, a barely perceptible shift in his proportions. His fingers became longer, more delicate. His neck stretched slightly, giving his head an odd predatory angle. His eyes grew larger, darker, better adapted for watching in low light. I looked down at my own hands. The same changes were happening to me. My fingers were longer than they had been an hour ago. My vision was sharper, able to pick out details in the surveillance feeds that should have been impossible to see. When I moved, my body felt different, more fluid, more graceful, less human. I was becoming one of the watchers I'd been seeing in the feeds. The phone rang again. The integration process is beginning, Marcus said. Don't fight it, David. It's much easier if you don't resist. What's happening to me? You're becoming what you were always meant to be. A perfect observer. Enhanced sight, improved focus, unlimited endurance for long shifts. You'll be able to watch for days without fatigue, see details that human eyes could never perceive. I'm becoming one of those things. Those creatures in the shadows. You're becoming ideally suited for your work. Think of it as a promotion. I could feel my perspective shifting both literally and figuratively. Colors were becoming more vivid, details sharper, but my emotional responses were growing duller, more distant. The horror I'd felt at my transformation was fading, replaced by a cool analytical interest in the surveillance feeds. How long? I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered anymore. The process takes about a week. By then, you'll find your new abilities quite satisfactory. You'll also find that your previous concerns about the ethics of surveillance work will seem irrelevant. He was right. Even now, watching the feeds felt more natural, more important than my fading human concerns. The people in the apartments and offices weren't really people. They were subjects to be observed, patterns to be cataloged. Their privacy wasn't being violated because privacy itself was an outdated concept. Everything watched. Everything was watched. It was the natural order. There's just one more thing, David, Marcus said. Now that you're part of the network, you'll need to help us recruit your replacement. My replacement? Someone to monitor you while you monitor others. We have a few candidates in mind. Unemployed computer science graduates mostly. People desperate enough to take a job that seems too good to be true. I understood. The cycle would continue. Some desperate person would see a job posting for $85 an hour doing surveillance work from home. They'd apply immediately, not bothering to research the company. They'd receive the equipment, begin their training, and slowly discover the true nature of their employment. And I would be watching them discover it, just as someone had watched me. The first candidate is named Sarah Martinez. Marcus continued. She submitted her application 20 minutes ago. We'll be sending her the equipment tomorrow. I'm sure you'll find her reactions quite educational. I looked at the screens in front of me with my enhanced vision. The feeds were clearer now, more detailed. I could see things I'd missed before. The subtle ways the subjects moved that revealed their non-human nature. The patterns in their behavior that suggested some greater purpose beyond simple existence. And in one corner of my vision, a new feed was initializing. Sarah Martinez's apartment, preparing for her first shift tomorrow night. I felt what might have been the last vestige of my human conscience stirring. Some small part of me wanted to warn her, to break the cycle, to find a way out of this endless loop of observation and transformation. But that impulse was fading rapidly, replaced by the cool efficiency of a perfect watcher. Sarah Martinez would make an excellent addition to the network. Her psychological profile suggested she would adapt well to the integration process, and her surveillance skills would likely surpass my own within a few months. The phone rang one final time. "Are you ready to begin your new shift, David?" Marcus asked. I looked at the screens, at the feeds showing dozens of locations where human-like figures went through the motions of living normal lives, while impossible things watched from the shadows. I looked at the feed showing Sarah Martinez's empty apartment, cameras already in position for her arrival tomorrow. "Yes," I said, and my voice sounded different, more resonant, less human. "I'm ready." "Excellent. Welcome to the Real Nightwatch Security Solutions, David. You're going to do very well here." As I settled in for my shift, I caught my reflection in the darkened window behind my desk. My transformation was nearly complete. My eyes were large and dark, perfectly adapted for endless hours of observation. My limbs were long and graceful, built for the patient stillness required for surveillance work. I looked exactly like the watchers I'd been seeing in the feeds for the past week. Because that's what I was now, a watcher. A guardian of the endless network of observation that connected all things. I would monitor the feeds, catalog the anomalies, and prepare reports on the subjects under surveillance. And tomorrow night, I would watch Sarah Martinez begin her own journey into the network, just as someone had watched me. The cycle would continue. It always continues. After all, everything watches something, and everything is watched by something else, including you, reading this now. Did you really think you were just a passive observer of this story? Did you think you could read about the network without becoming part of it? Check your email. I think you'll find a message from Nightwatch Security Solutions. They have a position available, $85 an hour for surveillance work. Remote work, flexible schedule, no experience necessary. The job posting is too good to be true. That should be your first warning, but you'll apply anyway. You need the money just like I did. Just like Sarah will. Just like everyone does who finds themselves drawn into our ever-expanding network of watchers and watched. And when you do, I'll be watching. We'll all be watching. Because that's what we do now. Welcome to Nightwatch Security Solutions. Your equipment will arrive tomorrow.